Little Miracles. Katie Marie 999. Summary. Growing Up Haddock Story 2, Hiccup and Astrid love their new roles as parents to two adorable toddlers. In fact, they've never been happier. But things take a turn for the worse when one of their children is snatched away in the middle of the night and it's up to them to get her back before time runs out. Only HTTYD and Riders/Defenders of Burke are canon. Notes. Growing Up Haddock continues with this story, the first in what will be a lot of stories featuring the Haddock twins and Hiccup and Astrid's attempts to parent them properly. This story was co-written by Emmert K. Enjoy. Chapter 1, Bonding Time. Chapter Text. This is Burke. It's home to dragon racing, snowball fights, and it has a charming view of the ocean. The best parts of it all are the kids. You see, while most parents only have one at a time, Astrid and I have twins. Toddlers, in a word. Adorable. Once Astrid and I survived the terrible twos, I thought my troubles were over. Nothing could have prepared me for what was to come. But then again, Aunt Surprise is what parenthood is all about. Hiccup Horrendous Haddock 3 was concentrating on his stitching. His saddle had a tendency to wear a bit after each use, and it was only a matter of time before a few stitches snapped open. He'd had less time for flying over the past 3 years, but he didn't mind in the slightest. Even Toothless had grown fond of the tiny people running around his human's house. And speaking of tiny people. Gotcha, came a voice just below Hiccup's chair. Hiccup looked down and was greeted by two bright blue eyes and a mop of vivid red hair. Tiny little arms wound around his prosthetic and came dangerously close to the mechanism that would pop it off and keep him from chasing his little boy. Yes, you did. Hiccup exclaimed, grinning down at his son. And now I'm going to get you. Fearless Finn Haddock shrieked with glee and began running away from his father as fast as his little feet would take him. The saddle lay forgotten on the desk as Hiccup pursued the child, his laughter joining his son's as they ran through the village. People jumped out of the tiny boy's way as he ran, occasionally looking back and giggling at the sight of his father slowly gaining on him. At long last, Hiccup reached out and grabbed the child around the middle, lifting him off the ground. Told you I'd get you, he laughed as he held the squirming boy aloft. Now prepare for a heck of a tickling. Finn screamed with laughter as his father tickled his sides. Hiccup was careful to lower his son so that if he did manage to slip away from him, at least he wouldn't face a 2-foot drop. Daddy, shouted another voice. Hiccup looked up and immediately spotted Adriana Miracle Haddock racing toward him, her green eyes sparkling and her wispy blonde hair flowing out behind her. Astrid followed, watching their daughter bolt toward her father and wrap her arms around his leg. Addy! Hiccup exclaimed and, holding his struggling son with one arm, reached down and scooped up his daughter with the other. The twins shrieked with delight as their father spun them around several times. When he placed them down, they were a little disoriented at first, but then, exchanging mischievous glances, they began to push their father over. He fell backward dramatically and the toddlers wasted no time in jumping on him and pinning him down. Ah! Help! Hiccup shouted, grinning the whole time. I'm trapped. Help me, Mommy. But Astrid shook her head, laughing as she watched the spectacle right in the middle of the village square. Several people stopped to watch Hiccup roughhousing with his children, including Stoic and Gobber. You know, if there's one man who loves his kids more than anything, it's Hiccup. Gobber said, causing Stoic to smile. Hiccup, beginning to feel exhausted, finally shouted out, "Okay, it's Poppy's turn now." The twins gleefully hurried toward their grandfather, who was now walking away in the opposite direction. Panting heavily, Hiccup got up, dusted himself off, and sauntered over to Astrid, who was watching him with a smile. I love them so much. I'd be happy playing with them all day, he said cheerfully, kissing his wife on the cheek. Good, they're all yours. I'll take the night off, Astrid quipped, nudging him with her elbow. Hiccup and Astrid watched as the toddlers finally caught up to Stoic and began yanking on his cape. The larger man looked down and picked up Finn, who was giggling so loudly, they could hear it from that distance. Adriana was still tugging on his cape, but she wasn't as strong as her brother and it seemed that Stoic hadn't noticed her at all. Fortunately, she was still smiling and didn't seem to mind that she'd been ignored. Hiccup took a deep sigh and jogged up to his father. That's it, he said when he was in earshot. You're watching Addy today. Stoic turned to him, his eyebrows raised. What? Hiccup pointed behind his father's shoulder. Stoic looked behind him, finally noticing his granddaughter tugging at his cape, her bright eyes alight with laughter. Oh. Didn't even see her there. My point exactly. Hiccup growled, crossing his arms. So you're going to spend some quality time with her? Stoic sighed, looking at his struggling grandson who was already growing quite a bit of muscle for a small boy. Hiccup, are you sure about? Hiccup nodded with a smirk. Yep. Come on, Finn. Let's go home. See you this evening, Dad. He took the little boy out of Stoic's hands. If you can give her up, he added with a knowing smile. What? But Hiccup had already walked away with Finn struggling in his arms. Stoic looked down at Adriana sitting in the dirt, trying to pull her shoe off. Oh no, dear, keep that on. Stoic bent down and shoved it back on. She smiled at him with wide eyes. He gulped. How does one spend time with a 3-year-old girl? He'd never done it before. Adriana seemed to sense his uncertainty. She stood up and grinned at him, pointing to the sky. See the quads? She asked in an almost melodic voice. Stoic looked up at the clouds and furrowed his brow. Of course he could see them. Why was she asking him that? There's Daddy's foot. Adriana shrieked suddenly, hopping up and down and pointing skyward. Stoic looked up, wondering what on earth she was talking about, and then he spotted it. One of the clouds did look a bit like Hiccup's prosthetic foot. He would never have noticed if it hadn't been pointed out to him. He smiled down at his granddaughter. Well, so it is. He said, finally glad he knew what she was talking about. Don't you think that one looks a little like a fish? He pointed to the cloud to which he was referring and was pleased to see his little granddaughter brighten up at the sight. Aha! And that's a dragon eating it up. She pointed to a cloud that looked a bit like a terrible terror which was passing over the fish cloud. It doesn't fit in his mouth. Adriana giggled. Stoic chuckled. No, it doesn't. Apparently the little girl decided that they had done enough cloud watching because she fixed her gaze on the ground and immediately bolted toward a patch of flowers. That one's Lello, she shrieked, pointing to a yellow flower. Had Hiccup pointed out the obvious when he was this age? Stoic couldn't remember. But the sight of his granddaughter, excited over such tiny things, was beginning to make him feel warm inside. That one's red, she pointed to a blue flower that time. No, dear, that one is blue. Stoic corrected. He gently took her hand and led it to a red flower. That one is red. Oh, said Adriana. She suddenly turned to look at her grandfather, her eyebrows furrowed together in intense concentration. She suddenly brightened up and pointed at him. You're red. For a moment Stoic was completely confused, but then he realized that his beard was red and that it wasn't a random outburst at all. He let out a booming laugh. Yes, I guess I am. Finn is red too. Mom is Lello and Daddy is brown. Adriana informed him, looking quite serious. Of course. What color is Toothless? Stoic asked, getting on his knees next to the child. Adriana thought very hard for a moment. Purple. No. Toothless is black. Stoic corrected, trying to keep his laughter minimal. Adriana giggled. Oh yeah. And Stormfly is blue. That's right. Stoic exclaimed, quickly grabbing her around the middle and lifting her off the ground. She giggled harder as he carried her over his shoulder, her head dangling down his back. Several villagers laughed at the sight, but Stoic suddenly realized that he didn't care if the entire village saw him carrying his granddaughter on his back like a sack of flour. He hadn't spent nearly as much time with Hiccup when he was small. And if Finn and Adriana were the god's way of giving him a second chance, he was going to make sure he did it right this time. I knew they'd be late. Hiccup said to Astrid as the sun finally disappeared over the horizon. You think something happened? Astrid asked, turning to face her husband. Nah, someone would have told us. She's fine. He replied. But I should probably go looking for them. Who knows how long he'll keep her. See you at home, Daddy. Finn piped up through a mouthful of chicken. Not this time, sweetheart. Astrid said, gently ruffling his hair. You need your bath. No I don't, the little boy protested, scrunching up his face and crossing his arms defiantly. Yes you do, little man. You've got dirt all over you, she said patiently. I can yuck it off you tooth Wes. Absolutely not. Hiccup chortled. Listen to your mother. I'll have Addie home in a bit. It was a nice day for a stroll through the village. A bit nippy perhaps, but then again, it was always cold on Berk. This weather was almost warm. A light breeze tousled Hiccup's hair and he took a deep breath, taking in the sights, sounds, and smells of his home. When he got to his father's house, he was a little surprised to find it empty. So where was his little girl? The answer came a moment later when he saw a light on in the great hall. It was a bit early for the older Vikings to congregate around a wine barrel, so Hiccup thought that perhaps Stoic had taken Adriana into the hall to stay warm. He walked up to it and heard voices coming from inside. He pushed open the doors. And then he stopped and stared. There was a large table set up in the middle. Seated at the table were Stoic, Gobber, Mulch, Bucket, Lotus, Spitaloot, Snotlout, and Heather. It took him a moment to locate his tiny daughter sitting between Snotlout and Gobber. She looked dwarfed by the two men's size, however she had absolute command of their attention. In fact, the word picture she was painting for them was so vivid that he could almost see the entire story taking place above her little blonde head. As soon as their eyes met, she dropped the cup she was holding with a clatter. "Daddy," she shrieked, getting up and running into his arms. "We had a tea party. I'm Mrs. Nesbit." Bucket shouted, causing some of the Vikings to laugh and others to groan in embarrassment. She got hungry," Stoic said in a slightly sheepish voice. "Ake, admit it. It was your idea." Gobber piped up. Stoic smiled, admitting defeat, as several of the Vikings chuckled at him. "I wonder Bifrotic tea party." Adriana squealed, holding her hands far apart. "And Uncle W helped me invite Eve wine. I just came for the food." Snotlout said sharply. "Sure you did." Hiccup chortled, trying not to burst out laughing and startle his daughter. "Gods, I hope your baby is a girl," he added, looking over at Heather, who was sitting next to Snotlout. The two had married the previous year and were now expecting a child. "He's a Jorgensen." "It's a boy," Spitaloot exclaimed, smacking his son on the back. "Well, you never know. For what it's worth, I think it's a girl." Hiccup shrugged. "You always think it's a girl." Snotlout chortled. "That's not true. I told Ruff and Fish that Gunnar would be a boy and he was. I'm just that good." Hiccup turned to his father. "How was she today?" "She was all right." "You've got a very special girl there, son," Stoic said, finally taking his head out of his hands. "Yeah." Hiccup smiled at his little girl and kissed her on the cheek. "I know. You don't have to take her right away." Lotus beckoned to her son-in-law and granddaughter. "Come join us. It's almost her bedtime, Mom." Adriana scrunched up her face in disgust. "But I would love to have a tea party with you, Addie. How about this weekend?" "Can Finn and Mommy come too?" asked the child, her eyes bright with excitement. "It wouldn't be a good tea party without Mommy and Finn, now would it?" Hiccup asked, tapping Adriana on the nose. Too much cute." Snotlout stuck his tongue out in disgust. "Why do you have to get all cutesy in front of everyone? You just wait until your daughter is born." Hiccup said, not bothering to turn and look at Snotlout. "It's a boy." "You keep believing that, sweetie," Heather said, patting her husband on the back. "And I believe it's time to go. Say goodbye to everyone, Addie." Hiccup enthusiastically waved to the group and Adriana followed suit. Astrid collapsed onto the couch, completely worn out. The entire front of her body was soaking wet, but she was simply too tired to change. Finn had made his displeasure at being given a bath astoundingly clear. And now that he was finally tucked into his bed upstairs, she had a few minutes to relax. A few minutes of solitude. Well, she might have gotten them had Hiccup not showed up. Her husband tiptoed downstairs, having successfully put Adriana to bed. He spotted Astrid on the couch, looking completely exhausted, and smiled fondly. "You look like you've had a full day," he said, sitting down next to her and slipping his arm around her shoulders. "Gobber was watching the kids this morning for a bit so I could do some drills with Stormfly." Astrid sighed, leaning on her husband. "And then I caught him trying to show Finn how to use a dagger. A real dagger. Thank the gods I spotted them before anyone got hurt." Hiccup laughed and Astrid gave him a quizzical expression. "I'm sorry, it's not funny, but what did you expect, leaving them with the blacksmith?" "I was expecting a few minutes with my dragon. And you were busy with that meeting and then Toothless Saddle, so I couldn't ask you." Astrid took a deep breath. "They're so much work." "I know. But worth it." Hiccup gently nudged his wife. "Completely worth it," she agreed. "Even when I want to strangle them. Especially when you want to strangle them. You learn patience that way. I'll have you know that I am extremely patient," Astrid said, elbowing her husband in the ribs. Hiccup leaned forward, noting the fact that the front of her clothes were soaking wet. "Yeah. I guess you are." The house seemed to be ringing with silence. With the children sleeping peacefully, Hiccup and Astrid sighed in relief, enjoying the lack of noise. There wasn't enough silence in their lives now. Most nights, they collapsed in bed after the children were asleep. But not this night. Hiccup gently lowered his head and placed a kiss on his wife's golden locks, taking a moment to thank the gods that he was lucky enough to find someone this amazing with whom to share his life. Unbeknownst to him, Astrid was thanking the gods for the same thing. Chapter 2, Sugar High. Chapter text. Hiccup and Astrid had taken the liberty of putting out rocks all over the village, giving their children strict instructions that they were to stay within the rocks and only go out to play when there were people around. Otherwise, they had to be watched by an adult. Finn and Adriana understood these rules very well and knew the consequences would be dire if they disobeyed. Finn had gone over the rocks once and had been kept inside and by himself for 2 whole hours as a result. He had watched Adriana and Helga Ingerman playing together from his window with a skull. No, he wasn't eager to repeat that incident. Like all little boys, Finn had a bit of a stubborn streak. And with parents like Hiccup and Astrid, this may have been magnified just a touch. And like all little boys, he had a lot to learn about impulse control. Then again, leaving a bucket of fresh, sweet berries out in the open was just asking for trouble. But Lotus had no idea that setting it down while she went into Gobber's workshop to ask him a question would result in such mayhem. Finn immediately spotted the ripe, purple berries and made a beeline to them. Grinning widely, he stuck his grubby little hands into the bucket and raised the berries, dripping dark purple juice, to his face. Soon he was covered in juice and his smile kept on widening until his whole face shone with it. "Oh Finn!" Finn looked up and found himself face to face with his grandmother. She stared down at him with a look of, oddly enough, disgust. Why was she looking at him like that? She should be happy that he had found something so tasty. "Yuck, Nana," he held up a fistful of berries. "Want some?" He pitched the fistful of berries into her dress and grinned when she jumped back, scowling at the splatter marks he had left. "Let's get you home." "You need a bath," said Lotus, sighing deeply. "No." Finn squealed, his eyes widening in horror and the grin melting off his face. He tried to get up and run away but his grandmother was too quick for him. She reached forward and gripped his upper arm. Finn began to scream very loudly in protest but she didn't let him go. Suddenly, he made his entire body go limp so that the only way to get him home would be to drag him. "Gobber," she called, trying to keep the boy at arm's length. "Can you help me for a moment?" Gobber immediately came out of his shop, took one look at Finn, and began laughing uproariously. Lotus glared at him but he seemed to find this even funnier. "Ah, he takes after his mother, doesn't he?" he guffawed. "Had a good time, didn't you, Squirt?" Finn nodded. "Aha. Gobber, could you help me take him home? I would rather not pick him up." Lotus sighed, narrowing her eyes at the boy. Come here, Finn. Listen to your grandma." Gobber exclaimed, swiftly picking up the child and clearly not caring that he now had purple splotches on his outfit now. "Noo." Finn wailed. "Pum down, Unca Gobu." "Nope." Gobber responded calmly. As muscled as the little boy was for his age, Finn simply couldn't struggle his way out from under Gobber's arm. Finally he went limp again. It didn't take long to take the toddler to at least one of his parents. Hiccup was home with Adriana and the two of them were unabashedly playing with stuffed toys. As soon as Hiccup caught sight of his son, he bit back a laugh. "What did you do to him, Gobber?" he asked as Gobber deposited the boy at the front door. "He did this to himself," Gobber replied, gripping Finn's upper arm so he couldn't escape. "And what did you do, little guy?" Hiccup asked, scooting himself over to his son. "There was buoys," Finn said matter-of-factly, trying to struggle out of Gobber's grip. "Yummy buoys. And they had juice. See, Daddy." Finn held out his sticky purple fingers for Hiccup to inspect. "Fresh berries that I'd just finished picking and had set down for only a minute so I could talk to Gobber." Lotus shook her head at her grandson. "I'd forgotten how fast little ones can be when they're determined." "Very fast." Hiccup agreed with a smile. "All right, buddy, looks like it's bath time." "Nah," Finn said, scrunching up his face and shaking his head profusely. "Yaha," his father said patiently. "Come on. If you come now, I'll have Toothless make the water nice and warm and you can play with your boats." "Do I need a bath, Daddy?" Adriana asked, looking slightly worried. "Not right now. Want to help me fill the tub?" The girl brightened at this prospect and rushed into the house. Finn looked less than pleased, but having warm water and boats to play with was a tempting offer, even if it did mean having to be clean. He finally stopped struggling. "You are so good with them, Hiccup," Lotus said with a fond smile. "I could never convince Astrid to do anything she didn't want to do when she was that age." "Well, that's Astrid. What did you expect?" Hiccup chuckled, taking off his son's shirt. "Come on, buddy." He took the boy by the hand and patiently walked with him into the house. Adriana was struggling to carry the buckets of water in the cupboard out to the tub. She looked delighted at the prospect of someone other than her being given a bath. "Thanks, sweetie," Hiccup said, smiling and taking the bucket from her grip. She looked relieved to let it go and watched her father pour the water into the tub. Once the tub was full, Toothless heated the water with a plasma blast and it was ready for Finn. Once all of his clothes were off, and would be thrown away now they were covered in stains, he settled into the tub and was surprised to find the water quite comfortable. Hiccup got out the little boats he'd made out of wood a few months after the twins were born and placed them in the tub. "Yuck. I'm going to Dragon I want," Finn squealed, directing the biggest boat to the edge of the tub. "You are? What kind of dragon are you looking for?" Hiccup asked with great interest as he began washing the purple juice off of his son's chest. Finn thought very hard for a moment. "A Dedwi Nadju. Yuk Stormfwi." He paused for a moment, his face scrunched in concentration. "Ca, I have a Nadju for Snojwatok. I'll let Odin know." Hiccup chuckled. "What about you, Addy? What do you want Odin to bring you for Snoggletok?" The little girl furrowed her brow, thinking very hard for a moment. "A night fury like Toothless," she said, pointing to the snoozing dragon behind them. Toothless raised his head at the mention of his name and grinned back at Adriana. She ran over and gave him a big hug. The Night Fury made a happy-sounding coo and Hiccup couldn't stop smiling. "Well, you still have a month to go. Have you been good this year?" Hiccup asked Finn, his eyes narrowing but a smile still on his face. "Oh yeah." Finn nodded. "Really?" Hiccup stared the boy in the eyes. "I been good." Adriana squealed, tugging on her father's shirt. "Can you be good this month?" Hiccup asked them. "Aha," chorused the twins. "Then I think Odin will definitely have a deadly nada for Finn and a night fury for Addy." Hiccup touched both toddlers on the nose with each mention. If Hiccup had thought the consequences of his son's indulgence was over now that he was clean, he was sorely mistaken. Soon after his bath, Finn began to act very strange. When Astrid had returned from her errand, he bolted to her and threw his arms around her. "Mommy," he squealed. "You home? I sure am." Astrid got on her knees so she was eye to eye with her son. A glimmer in his bright blue eyes made her slightly suspicious. What did you do today? Mommy, I played outside today and I followed Poppy and. Hiccup looked over and tried to hide his laugh as Astrid's eyes widened and she nodded profusely, waiting for their son to continue speaking. And Finn continued, his eyes widened. Tornado, he went like whoosh and would viewed, and it was awesome, Mommy. That's great, Finn. Astrid said with a genuine smile. But what did you do after that? I had buoys from grammar. Finn continued. Then I got a bath. He wrinkled his nose in displeasure. Did you, now? Astrid looked up at her husband, who was smiling down at them. He was purple. Adriana piped up, skipping over to welcome her mother home. Astrid was beginning to catch on to where this story was going. Did Grandma say you could have berries, Finn? Finn looked down sheepishly. No, he said with slightly puckered lips. They were in a bucket. I see. Finn, you know you have to ask first. Astrid said, her eyes boring into his forehead. Look at me. She placed her fingers on his chin and slowly raised his head so their eyes met. What did I just say? Ask first. Finn muttered. That's right. I don't want you to eat any food that's out without asking first. Okay. Do you understand me? She asked patiently. Finn nodded his head, looking a little bit guilty. His mother gave him a warm smile that he returned. Once she took her fingers off his chin, he scampered up to his room. Addie, that goes for you too. Hiccup added, looking at his daughter, who was watching the scene with some amount of fascination. If you see food lying out, what do you do first? Ask. Adriana said, nodding her head. Good girl. Would you go tell Finn that dinner is really soon? Astrid asked, pointing up the stairs. The little girl nodded and immediately headed toward her brother's room. Hiccup and Astrid watched her as she disappeared into the second level of the house. She's so obedient. Astrid said, crossing her arms and staring at the staircase. Where does she get it? Hiccup laughed. Not from me, that's for sure. Me neither. She smiled. They're so cute. They get that from me. Oh really? Hiccup asked, his eyes narrowing but the edges of his mouth twitching upward. He watched as Adriana emerged, grabbing the railing of the staircase and walking down the stairs. So they didn't get anything from me. Of course they did. Astrid replied, raising an eyebrow at Hiccup. They got plenty of things from you. The little girl tripped on the last step and fell forward, landing on her face. Like that? Astrid said in triumph. You okay, sweetie? Hiccup asked, trying to ignore his wife's comment. Adriana picked herself off the ground and nodded. Finn followed a few seconds later, hopping down the stairs with a sort of manic energy. Was Ferdin you? He asked in one breath, jumping off of the last 3 steps and stumbling slightly as he landed. Fish and peas. Hiccup replied, stoking the fire. Oh lovely. Astrid said, winking at her husband. We all know how good that'll taste. Finn ran around the fire pit making toothless flight noises as he did, making his parents smile while working on dinner or the fire. Finn ran over to Adriana and grabbed her arm, bouncing up and down. Anna anana nakomu running with me anana. Adriana squealed and yanked her arm away. Finn, let go. Hiccup faced his children. Finn, let. Ate daddy. Finn ran past Hiccup again, his little foot smacking Hiccup's prosthetic. His daddy flailed, leaning heavily onto the stone fire pit so he wouldn't trip backwards into the fire. Adriana snorted and covered her mouth with her hands. Finn was now running around the pit again but laughing and screaming hysterically, Ivuning. His parents and sister stared at him in shock, unsure what was happening. Astrid stepped out from the kitchen area. Finn, I think it's time to sit down. No mommy Ivuning and eyes fuan. Aha no mommy. Finn ran up the stairs in order to avoid his mother's reaching arms. Finn. Astrid jumped up the stairs 2 at a time after him. Hiccup and Adriana shared a look when they heard the running and tussle upstairs. Astrid finally clomped down the stairs with an upside-down Finn in her arms, his flailing legs barely missing her face and his shirt nearly falling over his head. Astrid stopped at the bottom panting and staring at their madly laughing son. "What's wrong with him?" Hiccup stuttered, shocked at the volume of his son's laughter. "Berries." Astrid huffed. "All right, you, settle down." She raised up her struggling son, gathered air in her mouth and blew hard onto his stomach, making him laugh uproariously from the tickling sensation. "No top, mommy." "Well, I have to give you something to laugh at instead of nothing." She grinned and repeated the process. Now Hiccup was laughing at the spectacle, and looked over at his daughter. "Addie." She looked up at him with wide green eyes. "Your turn." She fiercely shook her head, but her smile was unmistakable. She held her hands up to her mouth as she backed away, and her daddy stood stock still, waiting for the opportune moment to spring forward. "I'm gonna get you," he called, just as Astrid let go of their son. Finn and Hiccup both ran forward at the same time. "Hic!" Astrid called just as they collided. "Whoa!" Hiccup managed to grab his crazy son and pull him out of the way as he fell. The young man wiped out, his son on his stomach and flailing and kicking furiously while still laughing. And now Adriana was laughing at the spectacle. Hiccup blew his bangs out of his eyes. So much for dinner time. Hiccup and Astrid knew they had a hyperactive son. They just didn't know how hyperactive until a few hours later after some intense roughhousing. Adriana started to get crabby as the sky grew darker. She couldn't go to sleep with all the racket going on and Finn wouldn't stop giggling. The boy had barely eaten any dinner, though they did manage to get a few peas into his system. Adriana finally went up to her room, her eyes drooping. Hiccup told her that he would be up in a minute to tuck her in, but he suspected that she would be fast asleep by the time he got Finn to go to bed. Once the little boy was tucked in, he and Astrid collapsed in their room, taking deep breaths. "Never again," said Astrid, her voice sounding slightly hoarse from shouting at her son. "He will never touch sweets again." "Agreed." Hiccup breathed, his heart still racing from chasing Finn in circles. They took deep breaths, enjoying the silence for a bit. Their little boy would probably have trouble falling asleep, but as long as he stayed in his room and didn't make any pitter-patter, pitter-patter. "Great." Hiccup sighed. "Which one of us is going to get up and deal with this?" "I vote you." He nudged his wife. "I don't think so." Astrid nudged him back. "I cleaned out the outhouse this afternoon, so it's your turn." Hiccup slowly sat up, groaning as his back made a funny cracking noise. With two newly outhouse-trained children, the outhouse had to be cleaned more often. It was a highly unpleasant job of which he and Astrid were not particularly fond, so it was his turn to deal with the next crisis. Finn was sitting on the floor and playing with a small wooden gronkle. He was roaring as quietly as he could, which wasn't all that quiet. "Fearless Finn Haddock, what are you doing up?" Hiccup asked, giving his son a stern gaze. Finn yelped in surprise and they heard a muffled, frustrated sob come from above them. Hiccup sighed, gritting his teeth so that he wasn't too hard on the boy. "Do you hear that? Your sister is very, very tired and you're keeping her awake," he said in an unusually sharp voice. "Now you go upstairs and get into bed." "But Daddy..." "No buts, Finn," he snapped. "If you don't go up the stairs right now, I will put you over my knee and spank you." Finn froze. His father had spanked him only twice. Once when he had thrown a rock at Adriana and again when he had kicked his mother in the shin during a tantrum. If Hiccup was talking about spanking him, he was already in big trouble. "I'm going to count to 3. On." Hiccup began. The little boy immediately jumped to his feet and pounded up the stairs. Hiccup didn't even need to continue counting. But, knowing his son, he sat down on the bottom step just to make sure that Finn really would stay in his room. As he heard Adriana's cries finally cease, he thought that perhaps a restless night would be good for the boy, Hiccup thought. He would certainly think twice about putting things in his mouth that didn't belong. Hiccup was pleased to see a much quieter Finn the next morning. The boy was almost too tired to eat breakfast, and when he finally went outside, he didn't run as fast as usual. Adriana was usually the night owl, but even she seemed to have more energy that morning. After checking to make sure that his children were surrounded by villagers, Hiccup went to a boring town meeting that lasted until mid-afternoon. At long last, when the meeting was over, Hiccup emerged into the sunlight and immediately looked for the twins. He wanted to make sure they were still okay so that he could have an hour or so with Toothless. Finding time for his dragon was becoming a challenge. Astrid was throwing Heather a party to prepare for the new baby, so he hoped there weren't any more crises because it would be up to him to deal with them. In a few seconds, he spotted his son's bright red hair in the crowd. He ambled over to the boy and tapped him on the shoulder. "Hey, buddy. What are you doing?" he asked amiably. Finn faced his father and smiled, or at least it would have been a smile. His lips pressed together tightly and they stretched across his face, but it was obvious what was happening. "Finn, what's in your mouth?" Hiccup stood and bent low to his son's level. The little boy tried to scamper away, but Hiccup grabbed him by his shirt. "Nua, come here. What's in your mouth?" By now a few people had stopped to watch the exchange, Hiccup trying to squeeze his son's stubborn mouth open. Finn's eyes were alight with mischief and a giggle erupted in his throat, but he struggled to keep his mouth closed. Fearless Finn Haddock. Hiccup looked at him sternly. "Open your mouth. Now." Finn legitimately shrugged his shoulders, looked his father in the eye, opened his jaw, and out jumped a frog. "Gah!" Hiccup yelped as it landed on his arm and continued hopping away. He stared at his son incredulously. "Why would you do that?" "He's swimmy," Finn stated matter-of-factly. Hiccup swallowed thickly, trying not to gag. "No kid. You know what? Nope. Let's go home. I'm washing your mouth out. A lot." As he picked up the struggling boy, he could hear several villagers laughing. He sighed deeply. It seemed Finn hadn't learned his lesson about eating things he shouldn't eat. Then again, he didn't know what he expected. Like all little boys, Finn had a tendency to forget things he'd been taught. And it was Hiccup's job to make sure he remembered. The young man wouldn't have said it as he carried the child home, trying not to puke his guts out at what he had just seen, but he wouldn't have it any other way. Chapter 3, Tummy Ache. Chapter text. It was rare for Hiccup and Astrid to have moments together without distractions. Either they were needed by their children or their dragons. And on the rare occasions both were happy and taken care of, they were usually needed by someone else. But today was an exceptionally good day. They dropped the twins off with Heather, had a race on their dragons. Hiccup won by the tiniest bit though Astrid was slowly catching up, and had some time alone in the house. They had put their time alone to good use and were now on the couch next to each other, staring into the fire pit as its orange glow waned. Astrid breathed a contented sigh, leaning on her husband. As much as she loved being a mother, more than she ever thought she would, she lived for these moments. The little ones with only Hiccup and no one else constantly trying to get her attention. She turned her face so her nose was against his chest. She breathed his scent deeply, the smell of leather, warmth and summer. She hummed as she exhaled, trailing her fingertips down his chest. She heard and felt a light vibration of a laugh in his chest, his voice rumbling in her ear. "You all right there?" Astrid smiled and leaned into him even closer, snuggling her face into his chest. "I couldn't be better." Hiccup ran his fingers down her waist, catching the hem of her shirt. He slowly lifted it until his fingers touched her skin, soft and lean. He closed his eyes, resting his head on hers and gently trailing his hand up to her stomach, reveling in the softness of her skin as if it were the first time feeling it. Astrid slowly raised her head up at him and kissed the hollow of his neck. "I love you." Hiccup opened his eyes and kissed her right in between those gorgeous blue orbs. "I love you more." "Impossible." Astrid then twisted out of his grasp, his hand meeting air. She sat up a few inches above him, making him look up at her with a small smirk. Starting at his temples, she ran her fingers through his thick hair, making him lean back and sigh with a content smile. She smiled, knowing how much he loved that. And it had been a while since she did it. She towered over him and kissed his forehead, his nose. He smiled, waiting for her next target. She held his face in her hands for a moment before locking her lips onto his in a slow, passionate kiss that sent him reeling. How in the world did she learn to kiss so well? He wondered if that was his doing or if she had a natural talent for it. But he certainly picked a very good kisser to be his wife. Hiccup ran a few fingers up her shirt again, making her giggle through the kiss. He began to pull her down closer to him when a couple of high-pitched squealing voices were heard outside the house. Astrid pulled away with a sudden pop. "They're coming!" Hiccup moaned. "Whyy. Oh, stop being a baby." She sat beside him again but pecked his lips one final time. "Fine. But we're finishing this later." He winked at her with a seductive smirk that sent a torrent of butterflies through her system. The door flew open and in tottered their twins, both breathing heavily and excitedly. Finn was pointing back out the door, his blue eyes alight with excitement. Aunt Heath used tummy huts. Hiccup and Astrid exchanged very confused looks. Why had they apparently run across the entire village to tell them that? "What do you mean her tummy hurts? Is she sick?" Astrid asked, raising an eyebrow. Adriana shook her head. "She said the baby makes her tummy hurt." Hiccup's eyes widened. "Oh. We have to go get her right now." The parents struggled to climb off of each other. Their children watched them, completely bewildered as to why they were acting this way. And why their Aunt Heather had cried out and put both hands on her big tummy. Was the baby making her sick? Was she going to throw up? "Okay, I'll go help Heather get to the healer, you go get Snotlout," Astrid commanded as they bolted to the door. "Right." Hiccup exclaimed, opening the door and allowing his wife to exit the house before him. The twins stood there, staring at the closed door in surprise. What were they supposed to do now? Suddenly, the door flew open and their parents emerged, panting slightly. "I'm sorry, sweetie," Astrid breathed, picking up Adriana. "We need to go get to Aunt Heather really fast." "It's okay, Mommy," Adriana replied, putting her arms around her mother's neck. "We're going to go get Uncle Snotlout," Hiccup explained as he picked up his son. "Let's go, buddy." "Atay!" Finn squealed in delight. This was turning into a very exciting adventure. Astrid carried Adriana across the village in record time. She would have been faster but the child's weight slowed her down and the girl would never have been able to keep up on foot. When they got to the Jorgensen house, they found Heather lying against the wall, panting heavily. "Oh, thank Thor," she said as Astrid and Adriana entered the house. "This is a lot more intense than I thought it was going to be." "You'll be just fine," Astrid said, helping her friend stand up. "Why is the baby making your tummy hurt?" Adriana asked, her eyes wide with concern. "Because it's time for the baby to come out," Heather replied, shooting the little girl a small smile. Adriana furrowed her brow, obviously in deep thought, and followed her mother and aunt to the healers. Heather would bend over every few minutes, breathing heavily and moaning. That baby was giving her a very bad tummy-ache. When they finally got to the healers, Hiccup and Snotlout had arrived. Snotlout immediately rushed forward and put his arm around his wife. His face was paling by the second. Heather suddenly glared at him. "Don't you dare pass out like you did with Astrid," she said in a low voice. "You did this to me and you're going to be here for it." "Right," said Snotlout, taking several deep breaths. "Well, come on then, let's do this." He led her into the healer's house. Hiccup and Astrid sat outside, staring at the door. Not only were they feeling slightly awkward at being outsiders but they also weren't able to finish what they'd started at home. "Daddy," Adriana said, pulling on her father's shirt. He crouched down next to her. "Did I make Mommy's tummy hurt?" "Well." Hiccup thought for a second. "Yeah, you did." "Oh." The little girl looked close to tears. She suddenly ran over to her mother and threw her arms around her legs. Sorry I made your tummy hurt, Mommy." Astrid chuckled and got on her knees so she was facing her daughter. "It's okay, sweetie. I'm happy it happened because then I got to meet you." "Was Daddy happy too?" Adriana asked, still looking visibly shaken by this news. "I sure was," said Hiccup, scooting forward. "Addie, it's okay. That's what happens when babies are born. It's not your fault." "Yeah. As soon as I was holding you and Finn, I forgot all about the..." Astrid suddenly trailed off, looking around. "Where's Finn?" she asked, her eyes widening. Hiccup looked around and noticed, with a jolt, that the boy was gone. He faced his wife again. "He was just here. You had him last, Hiccup." Astrid snapped, now getting to her feet. Hiccup rolled his eyes. "All right, well, let's just look for him. He couldn't have gone far. Finn had obviously gone outside the rock barrier. He wasn't anywhere in the village square and no one had seen him. It was as if he had gone invisible." Astrid's heart began to pound in her ears. Where was her little boy? "Did you find him?" she asked Hiccup breathlessly as he ran into the village square. Hiccup shook his head. "No, he's probably wandered into the woods. We need to." "Hiccup!" Stoic called, running over as fast as he could. "Astrid, good. You're here. I found Finn." "Oh, thank the gods, do you have him?" Astrid asked, not sure whether or not to sigh in relief. "That's the difficult part. Now don't panic." "Where is he?" Hiccup and Astrid shouted in unison. "I said don't panic." Stoic boomed. "If you panic, you will make everything worse. Now get your dragons and follow me." "What about Addy?" "Lotus!" Stoic shouted. The woman, who was sitting and talking to someone on the other end of the village square, bounded forward. "You watch Adriana for a bit." It wasn't a question. "What's wrong with Finn?" Adriana wailed, looking genuinely terrified now. "Don't worry about it, sweetie," Hiccup said, giving her a surprisingly gentle gaze. "We'll make sure he's okay." Moments later, Hiccup and Astrid followed Stoic as they flew over Burke. They scanned the ground and trees as they went by, wondering where Stoic was taking them. Hiccup looked to his father to ask a question as the cliffs came to view, thinking that they must have passed the spot, but he stopped. Stoic's eyes were locked on the cliffs, making Hiccup's insides turn to ice. As they flew over the cliff drop to the ocean, he looked down, and nearly fell off Toothless. Their little son was lying on a ledge 6 feet down, still as a statue. He was lying on his back, his head facing toward the ocean with his red hair blowing in the wind. Hiccup and Astrid urged their dragons into a loop after Stoic. They flapped above the still form of Finn for a moment, unsure how to proceed. "Finn!" Astrid called down. The boy didn't move. Hiccup felt like screaming. He was supposed to be watching him. But he shoved down his emotions for the moment. The crag didn't look very supportive. If anyone bigger than Finn had fallen on it, it probably would have shattered. "How do we get him?" Hiccup asked Stoic, whose face was etched in thought. "It's too steep for you to fly down." "Astrid, stay here and watch Finn." "Hiccup, you land by the edge. I'll go get some rope and some help, then lower you down." Stoic called. The couple nodded, following his instructions without question. If the crag was as brittle as it looked, it certainly wouldn't hold for very long. Toothless landed on the ground near the edge. Hiccup hopped off and jogged to the edge, Toothless on his heels. The duo looked down at the still boy. From up close Hiccup could see the cuts and bruises on his little boy's body. He crouched on the balls of his feet, putting a hand to his mouth. Curse him for not paying attention. If his son wasn't breathing, no. No, he was fine. He had to be. He'd never forgive himself otherwise. A coo and nudge to his right shoulder brought him out of his reverie. Hiccup looked up, Toothless' wide eyes were in front of his, and the dragon cooed again. "You're right," but Hiccup sighed. "He'll be fine." Stoic soon flew overhead with Fish Legs, Rough Nut and Tough Nut, and Spitaloot trailing behind on their dragons. Stoic turned around and tossed one end of a long rope to Hiccup. Hiccup grasped the rope and gave Stoic a thumbs up. He was lifted off the ground a little shakily at first, Toothless shrinking a bit and watching steadily, ready to dive after him should he fall. "It's okay, Toothless," he called calmly. "I'm fine." The Night Fury visibly relaxed and sat on the edge, watching his friend's descent. Hiccup was steadily lowered the almost 6-foot drop. Just above his son now, he could really survey the damage. The cuts and bruises were minor and a little bump had formed at the back of Finn's head, but what made Hiccup smile in relief was the breathy sound coming from his open mouth. "He's breathing." He called up for Astrid Sake. "Good. Now grab him and let's go. Stoic called down. Hiccup was lowered to be side by side with Finn. He reached out, swaying in the wind a bit so he gripped the rope again. Once he was steady, he reached to his son again. His hand brushed his son's shoulder, but the boy stirred. Finn. Finn's eyes opened a crack. Daddy. Hey buddy, it's okay, I'm here. Finn stared at him for a moment before he tried to sit up. Easy buddy. A loud crack under them jolted them both. The rock cracked underneath Finn's body and Hiccup gripped his son's arm. Finn, come here. Finn jumped into Hiccup's arms just as the rock crumbled beneath him. Father and son watched as the rock fell down the rest of the chasm and splashed into the water. Woo, that was sios. Finn remarked from Hiccup's shoulder. Hiccup eyed him with a most definite fatherly expression. Yeah. I'll say. Stoic had Tornado fly them up to the ground to meet Astrid, who was just landing. Hiccup lightly rolled his eyes at his son's cheers of the wind blowing in his face. This so tall, he shouted. Hiccup touched on the ground and released the rope, trying hard to stay stern with his son. But he couldn't help but think of the glorious day he could teach his son fly through the sky by dragon. Finn. Astrid nearly yanked her son out of Hiccup's arms. Darmuumi itanti weave. Finn choked from Astrid's shoulder. Astrid, you're smothering him. You zip it. You still lost my baby. Astrid growled. And I just saved him. You should be thanking me. Hiccup frowned. Astrid sighed. All right, fine. But Finn. She sighed heavily, pulling him up with a stern expression on her face. You are in big trouble, little man. Finn looked at his hands. I think I should be a big man with a whittle trouble. Stoic couldn't help the chuckle from his perch on Tornado. You will be a big man when you obey your parents' rules, son. Finn sighed heavily in defeat. Atay, Poppy. Hiccup sighed heavily. All right. Let's go home. Addie's probably in fits. And we also have to check to see if your prophecy about Snotlout's kid is right. Roughnut shouted as they took off. Oh yeah. So we do. Astrid smiled as she hopped onto Stormfly. Prophecy. Hiccup scoffed. I'm no elder. I just know. The group sighed in relief as they flew back to the village. They touched down in the square, Hiccup smiling at his chatty son. He still needed a lecture, but he was so thankful that everything hadn't been too bad. That was about as terrifying as his parenting experience had been up to that point, and he was content to leave it that way. Sadly, fate had other plans. Ow! Finn wailed as Astrid attempted to put a salve on one of his cuts. Stop it, Mommy. Hold still. His mother snapped. But it hurts, the boy cried. What were you thinking, continued his mother. You know you're not supposed to go outside the rocks. We tell you this almost every day. The boy tried to pry his arm loose but she gripped it tighter. Ow, no, he shrieked, tears beginning to stream out of his eyes. Maybe you'll think twice before disobeying us again. Astrid's relief at his safety had long since ebbed and now she was more upset with her child than anything. Mommy. No, I'm not letting go of you, Finn. You did a very stupid thing today. You could have gotten very, very hurt. Or died. The boy's face suddenly went ashen. He looked up at his father, who had walked behind Astrid and gently placed his hands on her shoulder, still giving his son a very harsh look. Astrid, don't bruise him more. He said in a soft voice. The mother looked down at her hand and realized that she was probably gripping the boy's arm more than necessary. She loosened it slightly. Just then, they heard a very loud sniff from behind them. They turned around to see Adriana, her hands covering her mouth and tears spilling onto her face. Finn was gonna die, she squeaked, looking horrified. Astrid raised her eyebrows at her husband, as if non-verbally telling him to deal with this particular crisis since she was already so preoccupied with the errant boy whose arm she was gripping. Hiccup got the hint. He walked across the room and got down on his knees next to his little girl, who looked like she was going to burst into tears. Finn was in a lot of danger today, Addie, he said as gently as he could. But your mommy, Poppy, and I saved him. And look, he's okay now, isn't he? Adriana's lower lip trembled slightly as she nodded. Hiccup put his arms around her and held her to his chest. I promise that Mommy and I are going to do everything we can to make sure you and Finn are safe. You don't have anything to worry about, sweetie. He could feel her little heartbeat slowing down a bit as she relaxed and put her arms around his neck. Hiccup smiled as he hugged her, feeling like this was where she belonged. Right there in his arms where nothing bad could happen to her. And he would do anything in his power to uphold his promise to her and to Finn. As he stole a glance at his wife, who was still furious with her son, he saw a gleam of determination in her eyes that assured him that she too would do her best to keep their children safe. Heather and Snotlout's baby came into the world a few minutes after Hiccup, Astrid, and the twins came to find out how they were doing. As they sat outside in the dark with a group of other Vikings, the twins became antsy. Astrid was clinging to Finn to make sure he didn't run away again. Finding him in the dark would be almost impossible. A high-pitched wail came from the inside of the house and everyone brightened up. Moment of truth. Astrid said, grinning at her husband as Snotlout pushed open the door. The expression on their friend's face made Hiccup grin almost maniacally. He locked eyes with Snotlout. Don't say it. Snotlout growled at him. I wasn't going to say anything. Hiccup said, trying to act innocent. Snotlout turned to the rest of the crowd. It's a girl, he said in an odd voice, not quite disappointed but also not quite happy. She and Heather are fine. Several of the onlookers cast Hiccup surprised glances. He shrugged modestly, trying to not to gloat too much. Congratulations, Daddy, he said to Snotlout. Oh, shut up, you. Snotlout rolled his eyes. Suddenly, they heard a loud, delighted-sounding gasp come from inside the house. It's a baby, squealed a small, feminine voice who was certainly not Heather. Oh, Odin above. Hiccup muttered. Adriana, come back out here. But there's a baby, she repeated, sounding completely ecstatic. It's fine. She can stay. Snotlout said, sounding defeated. It was a good thing Adriana had made a beeline to the baby. Had she taken in her surroundings, she might have been terrified out of her mind. The others waited until Heather was cleaned up before coming in to see the newest Jorgensen. Adriana was sitting on the bed next to Heather, grinning from ear to ear and staring at the baby girl in her arms. She's cool, you know. Snotlout said, sitting on Heather's other side and looking into his daughter's face. Kind of small, but she won't always be. Are you crying? Astrid asked as she suddenly noticed tears begin to slip out of his eyes. No. I'm not. Shut up, Astrid. Snotlout grumbled, but the smile on his face only widened. Adriana looked up at Snotlout, the smile melting off her face. Don't cry, Uncle Snotlout. She said in a very high-pitched, shaky voice. Why you not happy? I am happy. But it was too late to stop Hiccup and Astrid's little girl once she was determined. She immediately got down off the bed, ran around to the other side, and threw her arms around Snotlout's neck. Snotlout looked up at Hiccup, his eyes wide, and Hiccup grinned. He then slowly put his arms around the little girl, feeling a bit uncomfortable and, embarrassingly enough, even more emotional. When she finally let him go, she stared into his face. Be happy, she said, wiping a tear out of his eye. Thank you. I will. Snotlout said, awkwardly tapping the child on the head. Adriana immediately ran back to get a better look at the baby. She stopped when she noticed that Finn had taken her seat, looking a bit upset at first, but then sighed and walked resolutely over to her mother. Can you have another baby, Mommy? She asked. Astrid chuckled. No, sorry sweetie. 2 babies are enough for me. Snotlout noticed the tiniest glimpse of sadness in Hiccup's face after she said those words. But he may have been imagining it. She's cute, said Finn, grinning down at the baby. Thank you. Heather smiled at him. I think so too. Finn leaned down and kissed the baby on her forehead. Oh no. Snotlout suddenly shouted, or he would have done if it didn't mean waking up his daughter. You keep him away from her. Hiccup and Astrid exchanged glances, both trying not to crack a smile. Chapter 4, Hand Signals. Chapter Text. Roll over. That's right. What's this one? 'Twas my waist. No, Finn, that's stretch out your wings. Oh yeah. Hiccup smiled at his eager children who were both leaning forward, completely engrossed in the little quiz he was giving them. They were never too young to learn hand signals for the dragons they would have one day. And they were already becoming very good at remembering them. Oddly enough, it was Adriana's attention span that tended to be too short for long lessons. It wasn't that she didn't want to learn, she just had a tendency to stare off into space and forget to listen. Finn was more forgetful, but he was getting much better at knowing which signal was which. Addy, what's this one? Hiccup asked, making his hand into what he hoped looked enough like a mouth with teeth for Adriana to recognize. Bite, she asked, looking unsure. That's right, said her father, his smile widening. And Finn, what's this one? Finn stared at him for almost a minute. I don't remember you. Nah, you wouldn't. I just made it up. It's the tickle Finn sign. Hiccup exclaimed, reaching out and grabbing his little boy around the middle. Finn let out a shriek of laughter, flailing his arms and legs around in an attempt to get away from his father's nimble fingers. Adriana giggled, inching away from the spectacle as if hoping her daddy wouldn't focus his attention on her next. Of course, that was exactly what he did. She let out a squeal and tried to run away, but he was too quick for her. He reached over and pulled her in, tickling her as fiercely as he could without hurting her. He loved the sound of his children laughing, but Adriana's giggles were special. He had been delighted to notice that she didn't just hiccup when she cried, she also hiccuped when she laughed hard enough. This was a trait he hoped she would never outgrow, and at this rate, it didn't look like she would. When the toddlers finally calmed down, Hiccup brought them in for a tight hug. I love you. Both of you. He said, kissing both children on the cheek as he did this. He made it a point to remind them that he loved them often. Stoic was a good man and, truthfully, hadn't been too bad a father all things considered, but Hiccup had always wished his father had told him he loved him more often. Stoic was the type to show his love for Hiccup rather than tell him. Now that he was a father, Hiccup didn't want his children to ever doubt his love for them and was determined to tell them he loved them as much as he could. Finn let go first and bounded into another room without saying anything. This was no surprise to Hiccup. He'd joked that his son was a struggler while his daughter was a snuggler. Astrid rolled her eyes at the pun, but he insisted on using it no matter how ridiculous it sounded. Adriana let go a moment later, but only to put her little hands on his shoulder and stare him right in the eye. I love you, Daddy, she said quite seriously, as if this was the most important thing she had ever said to anyone. Hiccup smiled in response. I love you too, Addy. Now I'm sure Finn is off causing mayhem. We'd better go after him. The little girl giggled and held out her hand. He took it in his and marveled at how tiny it was compared to his. And then they walked into the other room to make sure Finn truly hadn't gotten into any trouble. The twins were being watched by Lotus that evening as Hiccup and Astrid attended a tribe meeting. They almost weren't paying attention at all. Hiccup was engrossed in making a perfect, to-scale stuffed Night Fury. He had spent a little extra money to get the softest material so Adriana could almost use the stuffed dragon as a pillow. He made sure all the threads were black so that they would blend into the body of the dragon without being distracting. He wanted to make a Night Fury that looked just like Toothless. And with the amount of work he was putting into it, it was coming out quite nicely. Astrid was carefully whittling a perfect deadly nadder for Finn. She figured that a little boy probably wouldn't want something stuffed. Finn loved his wooden toys the best and was surprisingly careful so that they didn't break. She'd measured Stormfly and, like Hiccup, she decided to make her dragon to scale as well. It was taking a long time and she whittled in all of her free moments, especially during meetings. With Snoggletog a week away, she had a few adjustments left to make before she could paint it. The meeting didn't concern them very much, so the couple ignored Stoic's orders and announcements completely. He shot them frustrated glances that they never saw. And so, when it was over, no one bothered to let them know they were allowed to leave. Stoic watched everyone exit the Great Hall while his son and daughter-in-law were still hard at work on their children's Snoggletog gifts. Once everyone was gone, he strode over and placed a hand on Hiccup's shoulder. Hiccup jumped so violently, he actually toppled off his seat. Astrid stopped to laugh at him and then realized that everyone had left. Stoic took a deep breath and pulled up a chair so he could sit across from them. "It doesn't have to be perfect, you know," he said once he was sure they were listening. "I'm sure Finn and Adriana will appreciate your gifts no matter what." "I know they will," Hiccup replied, not taking his eyes off the night fury he was making. "But this Snoggletog is probably going to be the first one they remember." "I see," Stoic murmured, more to himself than to them. Hiccup looked at his father and was slightly surprised to see that the man looked the tiniest bit depressed. "Dad, this isn't a commentary on your parenting," he said, hoping to break the tension that always seemed to linger every time he and his father were in the same room. "I know that," Stoic replied, shaking his head. "But you are such a good father. Even better than I thought you would be." "Thanks, Dad." Hiccup gave his father a small smile before turning to his project once more. Stoic turned to Astrid, who seemed to sense his gaze and looked up at him. "You remind me of Hiccup's mother. So determined, so energetic and yet also very nurturing. I couldn't ask for a better mother for my grandchildren." Now Hiccup was looking up at his father, an odd expression on his face. "I hate to spoil the moment, but why are you being so nice? It's the holidays. I'm getting in the Snoggletog spirit. Peace on earth, goodwill toward men." Stoic let out a low chuckle. "I also haven't had much time to think of gifts this year, and so I thought a few kind words would go a long way. You've been working so hard on the kids' gifts that you forgot about us," Hiccup said with a very straight face. "I'm not admitting to anything." Stoic put up his hands, but the small smile on his face told his son all he needed to know. Stormfly loved the children. She loved herding them when they strayed too far from their parents. She loved the sound of their laughter when she heard them playing. She loved how happy the twins had made her trainer. Both she and Toothless were very fond of their trainer's young ones. Well, most of the time. The little boy came skipping over to her pen, his eyebrows furrowed in determination as he muttered to himself. He was waving his hands about in an animated fashion, almost as if trying to swat away a fly. "That one is Wallavoo, no, that one is Wallavoo. I tanti wemembiu," he said, looking quite frustrated with himself. Stormfly watched him with interest, taking a few steps out of her pen so that she could herd him home if necessary. As she trotted over, the little boy suddenly did a familiar hand signal. She thought about whether or not she should obey for a second before deciding that, since he was her trainer's young after all, she would oblige. She stretched out her wings and stared at him, unsure if he would try to do another signal. The little boy's mouth opened into a perfect O shape. And then his entire face brightened as he gleefully giggled. Stormfly loved the sound of that boy's laugh. There was an element to it that made it sound the tiniest bit like her humans. She was fascinated by this, how her trainer's boy was so much like her trainer in such small ways. She liked the boy a bit better than the girl. He had energy and spunk while the girl was a lot more subdued. He was much more fun. The boy then looked her straight in the eye and gave her another signal. She immediately complied, sitting down and giving him her full attention. He hopped up and down a few times, his giggling growing louder and echoing around them. The boy eventually stumbled onto the correct sign for rolling over. Stormfly instantly obliged, making the boy even more excited than before. Out of the corner of her eye, the dragon spotted the little girl sauntering over, staring into space like she often did and looking like she had no idea how she'd gotten there. She smiled at Stormfly and then turned to her brother. "Anna," the boy squealed. "The signal's wag." The girl fixed her gaze to the dragon's face. She performed the biting signal, which was an awfully stupid thing to do since that one was for defense against enemies, and Stormfly immediately snapped her jaws, finding nothing to actually bite. The little girl still seemed to be delighted by this display. And then things got complicated. Both children decided to try out their hand signals on their mother's dragon at the same time. Bouncing up and down and squeaking with glee like a couple of excitable terrible terrors, they did different signals at the same time. Stormfly watched them, becoming very confused. Who was she supposed to obey? She growled irritably and flopped down on the snow, deciding not to obey either one of them. The twins' faces fell. The Nada didn't like to disappoint the humans in this way, but she also didn't like being this confused. A moment later, she perked up when she spotted her trainer bounding forward, probably having seen the spectacle. "I see you've figured out why Daddy teaches you those hand signals, huh?" said her human. The children nodded. "Why won't she do it anymore?" the girl asked in a disappointed voice. "Because you're confusing her. If you take turns, she'll know who to watch and what to do." "Oh," said the boy, comprehension dawning on him at last. "See, I go first, mommy." Stormfly's human nodded and crouched down, putting her hands on her son's shoulders. "Can you do the hover signal?" The boy nodded enthusiastically and did the signal. Stormfly stretched out her wings and hovered over the ground for a few seconds before touching back down. "All right, Anna, your turn now." Stormfly's human gently pushed the girl forward slightly. The little girl did a different signal. The dragon immediately roared so loudly, all three humans jumped and then laughed at their own surprise. The game continued for nearly an hour. Stormfly enjoyed showing off her obedience skills and the children particularly enjoyed giving the orders. She'd herded them so much, it was kind of a switch, come to think of it. When her trainer finally grew tired of the show, she decided to take her young inside. It was getting dark, after all, and with so much snow and ice on the ground, it was probably safest to get the children in before the sun had completely set. Stormfly took a few steps back and rested in her pen. Toothless gurgled at her as she entered, as if to ask what all the commotion was about. The Nada sighed and made an exhausting sounded coo. Toothless took the hint and immediately trotted over the other side of the pen. Yes, Stormfly loved those children most of the time. But once in a while, they were simply too much for her. Chapter 5, Snogging on Snoggletog. Chapter text. The gifts were finally ready. The children left out their helmets in eager anticipation for Odin's arrival on Snoggletog night. But now it was the evening before Snoggletog Eve and Hiccup tiptoed down the stairs, a grin on his face and a hand on his mouth to keep himself from laughing too hard. Astrid was relaxing on the couch and staring into the fire. She turned to look at her husband and immediately knew there was a story. "Okay, who said what?" she asked as her husband sat down next to her. "It was Adriana this time," Hiccup replied, resting his head on her shoulder. "I was tucking her into bed and she looked me in the eye and said tomorrow is the day we say tomorrow is Snoggletog. It was so adorable. How do we have such cute kids? I guess we got lucky." Astrid sighed deeply, feeling warm and cozy next to her husband. "It'll be nice to have the day off tomorrow. The kids are going to love the Snoggletog Eve party. Think Gobber will have the bells attached to his arm this year?" Hiccup asked with a chuckle. "Oh gods, the bells. I always forget that he does that. Do you remember how Finn managed to pop them off last year? Took forever to pry them out of his hands." Hiccup laughed as silently as he could. "I remember that. Adriana had her hands over her ears because of all the racket. But she brightened up as soon as we all started singing. Yes, she did. She loves the singing. She'll probably be quite the singer later on." Astrid entwined her fingers with his. "Probably," Hiccup replied, his mind beginning to travel far away from their conversation. Right now, everything was perfect. The fire crackled and cast a warm orange glow around the room. Hiccup glanced up to see its effect on Astrid's eyes and felt like something was melting within him. The way her beautiful blue eyes reflected the fire was strangely intoxicating. She was a heavenly being, his Astrid, a gift he did not deserve. And it was Snoggletog that reminded him of all he had to be thankful for over the years. A beautiful wife who still surprised him after over 4 years of marriage. A little boy who was a handful but always made him laugh. And a little girl whose smile made him forget all of his troubles. He didn't deserve any of them. And yet he was given them anyway. Yes, he was certainly a lucky man indeed. The village-wide Snoggletog Eve party was a memorable occasion. The colored lights shone around the great hall, the roaring fires and body heat kept everything warm, and the Vikings were unusually cheerful. The children ran amok, drawing pictures and singing songs with their friends. The Haddocks arrived a little bit late and were immediately greeted with food and activities that they knew would last them most of the night. Sure enough, Gobber did attach bells to his left arm and was entertaining himself by running around and trying to catch the children in a strange game of what appeared to be Jingle Bell Tag. The children shrieked with laughter and Finn immediately joined them. Adriana gripped her daddy's hand and remained in the group of older Vikings. Pretty soon it was like old times again, with everyone from their old group sitting at a table with the next generation in their arms. Inga Jorgensen was asleep in the crook of Snotlout's elbow. He sent them all death glares as they sat down. No one wanted to make a lot of noise lest they disturbed the month-old baby and incite the wrath of her father. Fishlegs bounced Gunnar on his knee. The boy grinned as they sat down. Rough Nut was, as usual, picking on her brother and he was reciprocating her punches. It was quite a bit more subdued than when they were teenagers, more in good fun than anything, but it gave the rest of the group a feeling of nostalgia nonetheless. Adriana climbed onto Hiccup's lap, put her elbows on the table, and placed her chin on her hands. She loved to people watch, and the Snoggletog Eve party was a good opportunity to do just that. Her mother slid into the seat next to them and began to rub her father's back. She barely noticed this because she was much more interested in staring at the 1-year-old boy and newborn girl who were both so tiny. Was she that tiny when she was a baby? Her bright green eyes scanned the room and fell on a sandy-haired boy she hadn't noticed before who didn't look too much older than her. He was sitting next to his mother and drawing a picture, ignoring most other people around him. She couldn't understand why he would do that. Parties were for meeting people and having fun. She had the odd urge to go introduce herself, but then she locked eyes with Helga Ingerman, who was almost exactly a year younger than her. She slid off her daddy's lap and joined the other little girl in play. A moment later, Snotlout and Rough Nut began snickering at Hiccup and Astrid. The couple looked around and saw Gobber holding Finn over their heads. Finn had mistletoe in his hand and was giggling with excitement. "Oh, is that how it's going to be?" Hiccup asked, staring up at his little son. "You sure you want to watch this?" He didn't give the boy any time to respond before he immediately brought Astrid in for a very passionate kiss. Finn's face scrunched up in disgust. "You," he squealed. "You didn't tell me they were gonna do that." "Well, you wouldn't ha done it if I had told you that." Gobber chuckled, finally lowering the boy. "But now you two have to pass it on," he added to Finn's parents. "So we do," said Astrid, taking the mistletoe from her son. She stood up and surveyed the table. She was pleased to note that Tough Nut's brand new girlfriend had sat down beside him, but she decided not to be too cruel to the new couple. She held the mistletoe over Fishlegs and Rough Nut's heads and the two rolled their eyes a bit before kissing, both looking a bit sheepish at the applause they were getting. Finn stuck out his tongue and ran as far away from them as he could. Of course, she hadn't considered that Rough Nut wasn't quite as kind as her. The moment she received the sprig of mistletoe, she immediately held it over Tough Nut and his girlfriend's heads. "Ah," said the woman, whose name most of them still didn't know. Is that really necessary?" Tough Nut asked, his cheeks turning slightly pink. "It's the rule, idiot," Rough Nut said gleefully. "Now shut up and kiss her." It was extremely apparent that Tough Nut and his girlfriend hadn't kissed yet. But they both smiled and shrugged, deciding that now was as good a time as any to start. As the new couple kissed, Hiccup glanced over at Astrid, grinning knowingly, and she shot him a death glare as if telling him that if he spilled the secret of Tough Nut's first kiss, he would be choking on her fist in seconds. He winked at her to let her know that the secret was still safe with him. When Tough Nut placed the mistletoe over Heather and Snotlout's heads, the two of them shared a kiss so passionate that it made the onlookers feel very awkward. This ended their little game. Finn came running back with a scrap of parchment in his left hand and a piece of charcoal in his right. He grinned as soon as he met his mother's gaze. "Yuck, Mommy," he exclaimed, nearly running into her in his haste. "I drew you a picture." "Really?" Astrid asked, genuinely surprised. "May I see it?" "Aha." Finn immediately pushed the paper into her face. Astrid took it and smiled widely. She had to stare at it for a few seconds before she realized what he had drawn. Two people, at least she thought they were people, were riding on the back of a dragon who was spitting fire. To the untrained eye, it would look like scribbles, but Astrid was quite familiar with her son's drawing style. "Is that you and me on Stormfly?" she asked him. He brightened up, delighted that someone had figured out his artwork. Aha, and we fighting bad people, see. Finn pointed to the scribbles at the corner of the page. Now that Astrid looked at it more closely, it did resemble people running away in fear. That's really good, Finn, she said, gently putting her arms around him. Finn wound his tiny little arms around her and kissed her on the cheek. I love you, mommy. Hey, don't I get any of that? Hiccup asked, pretending to be offended. Finn stared at him for a few seconds, still smiling but his blue eyes sparkling. No. Oh, I see how it is. Playing favorites, aren't you? Hiccup narrowed his eyes at his son, who merely laughed instead of cowering in fear at his glare. No, I just love mommy today. Finn extricated himself from his mother's arms and scampered away once more. Oh, rejected. Ruffnut quipped, crossing her arms and giving Hiccup an amused smile. I'll just go find Anna. She always gives me a hug when I want one. And even when I don't. Hiccup replied with a shrug. I wonder if Inga will do that. Heather said, stroking her baby's cheek. All right, everyone, settle down, came a booming voice. Everyone looked over at Stoic, who was dressed up a bit more than usual in festive clothing. He smiled down at them all from his perch on the far end of the hall. The time has come for anyone who wants to say something or sing something to come forward, he said, beckoning to them as if he hoped that they all would take him up on the offer. Hiccup and Astrid exchanged looks. Neither of them could carry a tune to save their lives, but they still looked forward to this moment every year. The more tipsy Vikings usually came up first and sang or said something they would regret by morning. Once in a while, someone would actually sing well and surprise them all. These instances were rare. What they hadn't been expecting was for their little girl to run forward and stand up next to Stoic. She barely came up to the man's thigh and was almost invisible to the rest of the crowd, so her grandfather bent over and picked her up, raising him onto his shoulders so that everyone could see her. She looked slightly awed at the sight of the great hall from nearly 8 feet in the air, but soon composed herself. Can I sing something, Poppy? She asked Stoic, her eyes alight with wonder. Go right ahead, Anna. Stoic replied, gently tapping her knee. The youngest haddock took a deep breath and began belting out a well-known Snoggletog carol. She garbled some of the lyrics and her occasional giggles interrupted some of her song, but both Hiccup and Astrid stared in shock at their little girl. For a 3-year-old, she had an extremely good voice and she was almost perfectly on pitch. Stoic swayed slightly in the rhythm of the song and everyone clapped very loudly when she finished. Hiccup, Astrid, and several others who knew her well gave her a standing ovation. Adriana's face brightened up at the sight of everyone giving her praise for her singing, and she was still grinning long after she was deposited on the ground by her grandfather. She immediately bolted to her father and threw her arms around his legs. Did you hear my song? She asked into his knees. I sure did, Addy. Hiccup picked up his little girl, allowing her to put her arms around his neck instead of his legs. You were really, really good. I was. Adriana asked, almost as if she was hearing this kind of praise for the first time. Yes you were, sweetie. Hiccup kissed her on the cheek. I'm so proud of you for standing up in front of everyone. Were you nervous? The girl shook her head. No. I like singing. Daddy, came a very sudden voice from just behind her father's head. Hiccup turned around and suddenly had a mouthful of cream and a face full of pie. Finn was suspended in the air by Stoic and both were laughing uproariously. Oh, I see how it is. No love for daddies. Just pies in the face. Hiccup exclaimed, trying to act like this had been a horrible, traitorous thing to do instead of something he actually found quite funny. He heard a familiar hiccup and turned to look at his daughter, who was giggling behind her hand. Even you? Really? I can't get sympathy from anyone. He used his finger to wipe a bit of cream off his face and plop it on her nose. Food fight. Ruffnut called gleefully, grabbing a pie and smacking her brother in the face with it. It was instant pandemonium as most of the children immediately grabbed the creamiest, messiest pies they could and sought out their parents. This was a yearly thing as well, but it was the first time Finn had ever instigated it. He was delighted to see what he had started, at least until Astrid managed to bean him on the top of the head with a berry pie, the dark purple juice now dripping down his face. At first, His mouth opened wide in shock, but then the entire situation struck him as extremely funny and he found himself laughing until his sides hurt. A few minutes later, Rough Nut clocked Tough Nut's girlfriend in the face with the same sort of creamy pie that had started the whole fight. The table went silent, feeling very uncomfortable. How would this relative stranger react? But then a glimmer of mischief appeared in her brown eyes and she immediately grabbed the nearest pie and exacted her revenge. Rough Nut barely blinked when she was coated with even more pie. Instead she punched Tough Nut on the shoulder. "Okay, I like her," she chortled. "You don't even know her name." Tough Nut elbowed her in the ribs. "I don't care. She's awesome. Marry her already." What little of the woman's face they could see blushed a brilliant scarlet. "We'll see," she said, sticking out her hand. "My name is Svala." "Awesome. I always wanted a sister named Svala." Rough Nut exclaimed, giving the woman's hand a very hard few shakes. "You have not." "Have to." Hiccup turned away from the argument to face his little girl. She had gotten the cream off her face and was watching the craziness around her. She was laughing so hard, her hiccups made her entire body jolt every few seconds, but she hardly seemed to notice. He placed her down on the table and she immediately stood up, trying to get a good view of everyone in the room. She noticed that the little boy across the room had finally looked up from his drawing and was also watching the spectacle in front of him. Their eyes met for a second and he gave her an awkward smile before immediately looking away. It was at least an hour before the pie fight was over. More pies were coating Vikings than actually eaten, but those who had been creamed the most had their fill of desserts by the end of the night. Even some of the dragons had gotten plastered with the confections, Toothless being no exception. He immediately bounded forward as things were settling down and licked the remaining pie off of his trainer. Hiccup recoiled slightly but then realized that it was already going to be difficult enough to wash the pie off. What was the harm in a bit of dragon slobber in the grand scheme of things? This seemed to signal the other dragons, who all bounded forward to clean off their respective humans. Once everything had quieted down and all those who had wanted to sing or speak to the crowd had already done so, Stoic stepped forward and put up his hands to signal that it was time for an announcement. "This has been one of the best Snoggletog Eve parties Burke has ever seen," he boomed to cheers of assent. "It's time to wind down the night with a few Snoggletog carols. Adriana, do you want to lead us in a rendition of Have Yourself a Merry Little Snoggletog?" "Aha!" Adriana squeaked, running forward as fast as her little feet would carry her. Her grandfather picked her up and she began to belt out the lyrics to that famous carol. "Have yourself a merry little Snoggletog. Let your head be light. From now on, our troubles will be out of sight," she sang, grinning the whole time. The other Vikings joined in the singing and soon, Stoic placed his tiny granddaughter on the ground. She bounded back to the table and sat down, singing as loud as she could along with the others. As they worked their way through Jingle Bells, Odin is Coming to Town, and other holiday classics, Astrid glanced over at her little daughter and smiled. Adriana's head was resting on her arms and she was fast asleep. She wasn't used to being awake this late, despite having a tendency toward preferring the night to the morning. Astrid nudged her husband and pointed to their daughter. Hiccup chuckled and gently placed a hand on Adriana's back. "All right, Addie, I think it's time for bed," he whispered to her. She yawned widely and nodded. Finn's eyes were drooping as well and so Astrid picked him up and the Haddocks finally left the hall, waving to everyone as they went. It wasn't a long walk back but Adriana nearly fell asleep in her father's arms in those few minutes. As soon as they entered their home, Hiccup immediately went upstairs to tuck his daughter into bed. "I love you, Addie. Happy Snoggletog," Hiccup whispered, kissing the little girl on the forehead. "I love you too, Daddy," Adriana mumbled, half asleep. Hiccup breathed a laugh and went downstairs where Astrid was cleaning Finn up before putting him to bed. He was so tired, he didn't struggle and once the pie was out of his hair Astrid carried him upstairs to put him to bed. Hiccup padded up the stairs and went into his room, lying down on the bed and waiting for his wife to come join him. He looked up and noticed that the hatch on the ceiling was still open. He shrugged as Stormfly lowered herself into the room and warmed the rock bed they had left for her. Snoggletog was a time for family and the dragons were definitely included. He watched Toothless crawl through the hatch a moment later and hang himself upside down on one of the beams on the ceiling. Astrid entered a moment later and smiled fondly at the dragons, apparently coming to the same conclusion as her husband. She snuggled into bed with him. Hiccup gently put his arms around her as soon as she was within reach. She sighed contentedly, cuddling up a little closer so that they would keep each other warm and cozy. As they drifted off to sleep, full of food and dreaming of the happy memories they had made that night, they couldn't help but think that this was going to be the best snuggle talk they would ever have. The young couple awoke early the next morning. Astrid began to slide out of Hiccup's arms and he moaned slightly, wanting to keep holding her for a little longer. She patted him on the head as she sat up and put on a robe. Hiccup finally dragged himself out of bed a moment later. "I guess we should wake up the kids," Astrid said, wiping her eyes and yawning. "Yeah. I can't wait to see their faces," Hiccup replied. His face then brightened with excitement. "Hey, how about we take their gifts to them when we wake them up?" Astrid smiled and nodded. The parents crept down the stairs and grabbed their gifts. They went back up the stairs and Astrid immediately opened her son's room. He jolted awake at the noise and yawned. "Happy Snoggletalk, little man," she said, walking over and sitting on the edge of his bed. "Look what Odin brought you while you were sleeping." She held up the perfectly crafted nadder and the look on his face made the painstaking effort worth every second she had worked. "Tool," he shouted, taking the nadder from his mother's hand. "It's just what I wanted." "Aha!" Astrid chuckled and ruffled her son's hair. "Let's go downstairs and see what else Odin brought." "No." Mother and son looked up, puzzled at the sudden exclamation from Adriana's room. There was a loud thump and a horrible sounding moan. Astrid took Finn's hand and the two of them crept into the girl's room. Hiccup was sitting on Adriana's bed, his face a ghostly white and a slip of parchment in his trembling hand. Astrid scanned the room and realized with a thrill of horror that her daughter was not there. The stuffed Night Fury was on the ground, clearly dropped by its maker as he figured out what had happened. Astrid gasped. This had to be a joke. Where was Adriana? What was on that parchment? Hiccup, she muttered, her voice strangled. Her husband looked up at her, an expression of shock on his face. His eyes were wide and with shaking hands, he gave Astrid the parchment. She looked down at it and her heart stopped, her insides froze, and she couldn't seem to draw breath. Happy Snoggletalk. Or is it? You want your little brat back? Come and get her. You know what I want. Hurry up. Offer ends very soon. Underneath the note was a crude drawing of a skrill. Chapter 6, A Berserk Holiday. Chapter text. Stoic awoke a little later than usual the next morning. At first he marveled at the fact that he had actually managed to sleep through the sunrise, but then remembered that the day was Snoggletalk and that he had all kinds of surprises for his little grandchildren. Not one to keep them waiting, he got out of bed and threw on some festive clothing. He then left his house, his arms full of gifts for his family. Gobber was hobbling toward the Haddock house as well, his arms just as full of toys and treats for the little twins. Bit of a late start, don't you think? Gobber asked by way of a greeting, chuckling to himself. Overslept. First time in years too. Guess the gods don't want me to wake the kids before the sunrise. Probably for the best. Stoic shrugged as they arrived at the door to the Haddock house. He rapped his knuckles on it. Happy Snoggletalk. Anybody awake? There was no reply. The older men exchanged puzzled glances. Finn and Adriana usually shrieked with excitement when they showed up no matter what day it was, and Snoggletalk was even more special. Stoic knocked on the door again, but still there was no reply. He slowly pushed it open. The main room was deserted, Snoggletalk decorations still up and the twins' stockings full of untouched goodies. No noise came from upstairs. The house is super quiet, Stoic. Maybe we shouldn't go in there. You know they have a rule about the bedroom. Gobber whispered. Stoic rolled his eyes. Gobber, you are the sole reason that is an established rule to begin with. Everyone else in the whole of the archipelago has that rule understood. Well, I practically raised the boy in the forge. I never thought I'd walk in on anything like that. Stoic held up a hand. Spare me. The men crept into the house. It was as if it had been deserted for at least a day. Praying that the family was still sleeping on the second floor, they walked up the stairs, noting that Hiccup and Astrid's bedroom door was open but the room was empty. Finn's bedroom door was wide open as well but no one was there either. And then they spotted Adriana's room at the end of the hall, her door slightly ajar. The feeling of uneasiness mounting, they pushed open the door and stopped. Hiccup was sitting down on his daughter's bed, his face ashen and a slip of parchment in his hand. He didn't look up at his father and friend as they walked in, he was staring at his knees, his eyes wide and his breaths coming in short gasps. "Son." Stoic strode forward and put a hand on Hiccup's shoulder. Hiccup looked up at him, an expression the man had seen only once before etched into his features. It was as if he was back in the village square the day Astrid had been taken, the day Hiccup had nearly killed himself to get her back before the twins were born. One look at his son's face told Stoic that what had happened was very bad. "He took her," Hiccup said in a weak voice, handing his father the parchment. "He has my baby." "Where's Finn?" asked Stoic, trying to think clearly. "Astrid took him to her mother's," Hiccup replied, his expression not changing. "She'll be back soon." Stoic nodded and gently took the paper out of his son's hand. He read it over and handed it to Gobber, trying to keep his hands from visibly trembling. Something about the note seemed a bit off to him but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. For one thing, the pronoun him was hastily rubbed out and replaced with her. For another thing, something didn't look right about the skrill. Gobber angrily crumpled the note when he had finished reading it but kept it on hand just in case it would be needed later. How did he do this without being detected? Gobber asked, sounding like he was in shock. "Window," Hiccup said, now staring blankly at his hands. "It's open." "Sound the alarm," Stoic told Gobber. "Get everyone in the Great Hall. Snoggletog is off until further notice." Gobber nodded once and immediately walked out of the house as fast as he could. Stoic turned back to his son, who looked like he was trying desperately not to lose it. "Hiccup, we will get her back," he said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Dager has pulled this in the past. We know what he's capable of and we will fight until she's home and safe." Why would he do this? "On Snoggletog, my baby girl on a day like this, not my Addy, this can't be happening." The young father's voice raised in pitch with each syllable and he sounded dangerously close to tears. "Hiccup." Stoic got down on his knees, placed his hands on both of Hiccup's shoulders, and looked his son in the eye. "You have got to calm down. Adriana needs you to think clearly. If you want her safe at home, you need to put your feelings aside." Hiccup took a deep, shuddering breath and nodded. "Okay, let's go." Snotlout smiled as he caught sight of his baby girl that morning. She stirred slightly as he picked her up and then stretched her arms out and yawned. He gently placed her in his arms and padded downstairs where his wife was waiting with helmets full of goodies. There were new outfits Heather's parents had made and a few stuffed toys Inga could play with when she was a little older. But they could wait. He snuggled up to Heather on their couch, the fire she had set beginning to warm them on that cold day. She took a deep breath, gently taking their daughter from him so she could feed her. It was turning into a very cozy Snoggletog morning. At least it would have been. The couple heard a loud clanging noise and voices shouting outside. At first Snotlout was about to jump up and give the others a piece of his mind for making so much racket no matter what day it was, but there was something about them that wasn't at all jolly or excited. In fact, they sounded alarmed. And with a jolt, he realized that the bells being rung were not the Snoggletog bells but the summoning bells. A moment later, he heard the familiar horn being blown on top of the clanging bells. The horn was for life or death emergencies only. Something had happened, something big, and everyone was being called into the Great Hall. "We have to go," he said to his wife. "Come on, wrap Inga up and get to the hall. I don't know what's going on but it's obviously urgent." Heather nodded and in a few minutes, they were ready to leave. People ran around them, some shouting about a missing person. A few minutes later, they distinctly heard someone mention a missing child. Snotlout and Heather exchanged panicked looks, hoping that the missing child wasn't one they knew. "Snotlout! Heather!" came a loud voice from just behind them. "Fish legs!" Snotlout shouted, spinning around on the spot. What the hell is going on here? Fishlegs stopped for a second to catch his breath before telling them. Adriana Haddock. What about her? Heather asked, her stomach clenching. She was taken last night. They left a note. We have to get to the Great Hall. Fishlegs said between deep breaths. Snotlout felt slightly weak, though he didn't show it. It wasn't just the fact that Adriana was one of the most loved children on Berk, it was the fact that she had wormed her way into his and Heather's hearts as well. Now that he was a father, he knew that what he was going to see when he got to the Great Hall wasn't pretty. If someone had taken his little girl, he didn't want to face Hiccup and Astrid. Not now. But if it meant saving that sweet little girl who made everyone's day a little bit better, he was going to do what he could. When they got to the Great Hall, the moment Snotlout and Heather caught sight of Adriana's parents, they knew that nothing could have prepared them for this. Hiccup's face was in his hands and even from across the hall, they could tell he was shaking. Astrid had one arm around his shoulder. Her face was rather unemotional, as if she hadn't gotten over the initial shock, but the knuckles on her other hand, which was gripping Hiccup's wrist, were white. Snotlout never did like Hiccup very much, but the sight of his acquaintance looking this distraught was enough to make even him feel sorry for him. We have to get her back. Snotlout whispered to Heather. They took their seats as the Great Hall filled. Never had it been so quiet. The atmosphere of pity and determination among the Vikings was so thick, it was almost visible in the air. Several of them were looking in the very place Adriana had sung the previous night. The Snoggletod Eve party seemed like a lifetime ago. All right everyone, settle down. Stoic boomed, standing up and putting out his arms. What little talking that was going on ceased at once. For those of you who don't know, Adriana Haddock was abducted last night by the Berserkers. We don't have much time. We need some of you to stay behind to look after Finn and the other kids. All those who want to volunteer, please let Lotus Horferson know when the meeting ends. The rest of you are coming with us. If Dager is determined to start a war, we won't disappoint him. As Stoic continued talking about the preparations, Snotlout leaned in to have a quiet conversation with Heather. I think we should stay behind and look after the kids. Inga's so small, I think she'll be better off with both of her parents nearby. He whispered. Heather nodded. I think you're right. We're their friends and I think they would feel better if someone they knew well was looking after their son. Someone other than his grandmother. With that settled, they quietly got up and sat down at Lotus' table. She was holding a very antsy Finn who, thankfully, didn't seem to have been paying attention to what was going on. Perhaps it was for the best that he wasn't aware of the dire emergency that was unfolding. A small, sandy-haired boy standing nearby between his parents looked horror-struck and very close to tears. A red-haired girl actually was crying into her mother's shoulder. Snotlout and Heather thought that it might have been better not to burden children so young with such frightening news. Heather gently rocked Inga, unaware of the fact that she was holding her little daughter closer than usual. Everyone got to their feet a few minutes later, Stoic's orders having been given. The sandy-haired boy's parents offered to stay behind as well, as did Svala and the mother of the sobbing redhead. Tough Nut kissed his girlfriend on the cheek before bolting out of the Great Hall. Rough Nut and Fishlegs dropped off Helga and Gunnar before following the crowd of Vikings out of the hall. What's taking so long? Hiccup snapped from atop his dragon. We need to get to Berserker Island. Who knows how long he's going to let her live? His nearly paralyzing fear finally melted into rage. Both he and Astrid were ready to leave, weapons already attached to their dragons. Hiccup was breathing through his teeth, he didn't want to spend one more moment stalling. His little girl was far away and she needed him. He looked around at the Vikings rushing around, mounting their dragons and getting their weapons ready. Were he in a clear state of mind, he would have been touched that so many people were determined to rescue his daughter. Calm down, honey. You'll get her back, said an old woman beneath him that he only vaguely recognized. You just need to be patient. Not everyone can get ready to go as fast as you. She patted his knee in a comforting manner. Yes, thank you, he replied, trying to breathe a little easier. The woman sauntered away and, even though he wasn't necessarily feeling better, he was glad that she had gone out of her way to comfort him. When he looked back a moment later, she was nowhere to be found. It was just as well. She didn't look up to a battle or long hours watching children. Others came by every few minutes to offer their encouragements, and he was just beginning to feel better when it was finally time to fly away. "Remember what I said?" Stoic called to the hooligans behind him. "Your mission is to find Adriana and bring her home. Not start a war, not take anything from the berserkers, simply find her and leave." The other Vikings nodded and murmured their assent. Many of them were strongly reminded of the rescue mission 3.5 years previously. Adriana had been in peril then too, but she wasn't aware of it at the time. Why had Dagur decided to pull this stunt again? To repeat his own failed plan seemed foolhardy. But then again, he wasn't called Dagur the Deranged for nothing. They finally took off, Hiccup immediately taking the lead on the fastest dragon with Astrid and Stoic close behind. Hiccup felt his heart pounding as he encouraged the Night Fury to go even faster. Toothless did his best to oblige, feeling almost offended that the little female human had been snatched away under his watch. He exchanged looks with Stormfly, who seemed to feel similarly. It was their responsibility to keep their humans young safe when their humans couldn't, and they had failed. Everyone had failed. The anger that fueled them nearly rivaled the little girl's parents. The rocky spits of land zoomed beneath them, looking more like little blurs than anything. Astrid briefly wondered which one was the birthplace of the twins, but she had more important things to focus on as she encouraged her dragon to go even faster. She didn't know how long her little girl had been gone, but she didn't want it to be a minute longer. At last, Berserker Island came into view. The Snoggletog lights glimmered below them. There were no guards set up, no ships around the island. Something was amiss. Even Hiccup noticed for a moment. But he didn't have time to think about it. Not when his baby girl was in danger. No, he was going to fly down there and save her no matter what obstacles he would have to face. No matter what day it was. Even if it killed him, he would get his baby back. Chapter 7, False Accusations. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Hiccup led the descent to Berserker Island, his heart drumming in his ears and his face beet red. He was going to kill Dagur for taking his little girl. All the hooligans knew it, so they tried to fly as close to him as they could to keep him from getting into a fight he couldn't win. Of course, most of them were livid as well. None of them had any reservations about flying all the way out to Berserker Island to rescue the youngest haddock. Adriana loved engaging anyone in conversation, so many of them had gotten to know her and thought she was a wonderful little girl. Certainly not one who deserved this kind of treatment, as if any child did. There was something a bit off about Berserker Island. All of them saw it the moment it came into view, but they were of one mindset, so it didn't register as much. It was quiet and calm. Snoggletog lights twinkled below them and very few people were outside. But one person in particular was outside, and Hiccup recognized him at once. When Toothless was close to the ground, the young father leaped off his back, receiving many surprised shouts from the hooligans behind him, and tackled the Berserker chief to the ground. Both men tumbled and rolled in the dirt for a few moments from the force of the collision, but Hiccup managed to pin Dagur down with his knees on the man's shoulders. "Where is she?" he demanded, grabbing a knife and putting it to Dagur's throat. "Where's Adriana?" "What?" Dagur seemed to have been taken completely by surprise. He blinked several times, as if unsure of whether or not he was dreaming this. "Who's Adriana? Don't play stupid. You took my daughter, and so help me, if you don't start talking now, I will kill you." Hiccup spat, his nose almost touching Dagur's. "Congratulations, Hiccup, you would be the first in your family line to have a girl. Now get off me," the larger man bellowed, trying to wiggle out from under him. Hiccup leaned in close to Dagur's left ear. "I have twins and you know it." "Oh, 2 girls? Yeah, color me less surprised." Dagur chortled, seemingly not afraid of the knife pressing up against his windpipe. "Stop it. Stop playing dumb. My son was your target, but I guess you sneaked through the wrong window. Trying to take out the future chief. Well, it didn't work. I will kill you with my bare hands and burn your village to ash if you don't tell me where my daughter is. Hiccup shouted, his face red with rage. Okay, let me get this straight, you have twins, a boy and a girl, and you think I took your daughter? Dagor let out a bark of laughter. How stupid do you think I am? I lost 3 teeth last time I pulled that. They don't call you deranged for nothing. Deranged, yes. Stupid, no. By this time, the hooligans had landed and were standing in a semicircle around the two men. Stoic quietly stepped forward and placed a hand on Hiccup's shoulder. Son, I think he's telling the truth. No, this is exactly what he wants. I am not leaving this sorry spit of land until I have my daughter. And if so much as one of her hairs is singed or cut, I will leave this god's forsaken rock in a smoke heap. Hiccup hissed, his teeth clenched. Dagor rolled his eyes. Yeah, I kind of picked up on that. Good thing I don't have her. A spark of fear appeared in Hiccup's eyes for just a second, but his expression remained unchanged. What the hell did you do to her? Nothing. That's what I've been telling you. Hiccup. Stoic gently squeezed his shoulder. Hiccup flinched and pushed the blade on Dagor's throat harder, making his friends and family tense. They prayed they wouldn't see Hiccup's first kill in those next few seconds. Hiccup, he's telling the truth. Don't do this. Hiccup ground his teeth and growled, back off. No, this isn't right. She's not here. Hiccup forced himself not to look back at his father in disbelief. Whose side are you on? Hiccup, be reasonable. Reasonable would be sending people through this village and searching for your granddaughter. Now. Go ahead. Search to your heart's content. But if you really want to find your precious little girl, you're wasting your time here. Stoic bit back a sigh and gently waved his people forward, who cautiously walked past the Berserkian guards, who looked to their incapacitated chief for orders. Dagor stared into Hiccup's eyes with a scathing glare. If one of my villagers is injured, this is war. Hiccup leaned closer, his eyes just as fierce. For my daughter's safe return, you will get it. Unreservedly. Stoic patted Hiccup's shoulder. Get off of him, son. No. We will make sure he doesn't get away. Now get off of him. Let the man breathe. Stoic ordered. Dad. Either you get off of him yourself or I'll pull you off. Is that what you want? Breathing heavily through his teeth, Hiccup slowly got off of the Berserker chief, wielding the knife in a threatening manner, as if to say that any attempt to escape would be fatal. Dagor stood up and dusted himself off, looking slightly peeved but unhurt. There was a bright red mark on his throat from Hiccup's knife, but it didn't cut through his flesh. Now tell me where the hell you got this insane idea, he said, massaging his neck. Gobber smoothed out the note and held it up. Dagor snatched it from his hand and stared at it for a few seconds. I didn't write this. I don't even recognize this handwriting, he exclaimed, raising an eyebrow at the parchment. And this idiot drew our crest backwards. So I've been framed and insulted in one night. Hiccup huffed loudly, you're not very convincing. Look at my crest, fool. It's all over the place. It doesn't face right, it faces left. Let me see that. Hiccup snatched the paper from Dagor's hands and realized with a jolt that the Berserker chief was correct. Stoic walked over and looked over his shoulder, narrowing his eyes at the note. No Berserker would have made such a glaring mistake. And there was something else about the note, something that didn't seem quite right, but then it clicked. Dagor, are you right-handed or left-handed? He asked in a very low voice. Right. What does that have to do with anything? Dagor snapped, pointing to the hilt on his left side. He didn't write this note, Hiccup. How do you? Look at the smudges. This was written by a left-handed person. Stoic pointed to the note with his left finger, tracing it across the letters. Hiccup swallowed rebelliously, refusing to see the logic in this statement. Then he made someone in his party who is left-handed write it. Dagor, how many of your men are left-handed? Stoic asked him. I don't know. A couple hundred. But none of them are dumb enough to draw the Berserker crest backwards. Dagor was beginning to lose patience. Hiccup felt a pang that he was being proven wrong, but he refused to let up. Regardless, she's here. She has to be. Dager slapped his arms at his sides. Would you stop being ridiculous? You obviously don't want to face the facts. Someone lured you here under false pretenses. It's a red herring, Hiccup. A distraction. Hiccup shook his head, his expression tight. No. Astrid stepped forward. Hiccup, if he's right, we need to get back to Berk. There aren't many soldiers there, not nearly enough to protect Finn against an army. Dager looked to Stoic suddenly. You better get your people off my land before I send in a war party. We both know she's not here, whether he wants to accept it or not. Hiccup, if this really is a distraction, our son is in danger. Is that what you want? Think about it. We've lost one child already, do you really want to lose the other? Astrid pleaded, grabbing his arm. Hiccup whirled around, staring her in the face. Don't you dare say that like you're giving up on her. Would you stop being illogical? Dager shouted, sounding genuinely exasperated. When I took Astrid from you, I held her in front of your face. Do you really think I'd stand here denying everything if I really did have your kid? Hell, don't you think I'd have guards out? Don't you think I'd have drawn my crest the right way? That I'd write the note myself? Or do you still think this is an elaborate hoax and I'm just playing mind games? Tell me, Hiccup, do I look like the kind of person who would do that? Hiccup took a few steps back, grabbing fistfuls of his own hair. Their logic was sound. Even he couldn't deny it anymore. But if she wasn't on Berserker Island, he had no other leads. No other way of finding her. Finally Stoic whistled loud with his fingers to call back the hooligans. Hiccup gaped at him. What are you? We're leaving. What? No Dad, she's here. No, she's not son. Whoever did this is playing us. Now we are leaving. Stoic placed a hand on Hiccup's arm, gently pulling him toward Toothless. Hiccup shrugged it off. No. I'm not leaving without my daughter. You're not stupid, Hiccup. You know she's not here. You're just clinging to false hope because it's the only lead we have. But there might have been something we missed back on Berk. Stoic grabbed the man's shoulders and roughly turned him around so they were staring at each other. If you value your daughter's life, you won't waste any more time. He turned to look at Dager. But if we find out you do have her, we will not hesitate to attack. Dager stared back at him unblinkingly. I swear I do not now, nor have I ever had her. At least not since she was born. The hooligans had all returned at this point and many were on their dragons. Stoic gave them the signal to fly away without him. Dad, what are you? Go, son. I need a word with Dager. Stoic said, waving him away with one hand. Trembling violently, Hiccup mounted his dragon and flew away. Stoic strode over to Dager. We had no idea. I get it. Dager said, turning to face the hooligan chief. We were framed. I'm not going to do anything reckless like declare war because of some imbecile. But listen, when you find out who framed me, send him here under armed guard. No one frames me and gets away with it. I'll take care of your little pest for you. Stoic considered this for a few seconds and then nodded. He swung a leg over Tornado and, without looking back, ascended into the sky. Hiccup was silent on the long flight home. The sun was high in the sky when they touched down on Berk. Aside from looking deserted, which wasn't at all surprising, nothing had changed. Nothing looked suspicious. Perhaps Dager had been wrong. Perhaps the person who took Adriana had made a move at all. But there was only one way to be certain. Open up. Hiccup shouted, pounding on the doors to the Great Hall. I need to see my son. Snotlout opened the door, wincing. You're lucky Inga was already awake, otherwise I'd have. But Hiccup wasn't paying any attention to his friend. He bolted forward and very nearly knocked a few children over in his haste. He scanned the room for a mop of bright red hair and, with a sigh of relief, spotted Finn in the corner, playing with a few other boys his age. The boy spotted his father a moment later and raced forward. Daddy, he shouted, throwing his arms around Hiccup's legs. What's wrong? Why is there no Snodgwatog? Hiccup got on his knees so he was looking his little son in the eye. Something big happened, buddy, he said, his mind racing a million miles an hour. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Astrid rush into the room. The moment she spotted Finn, she nearly cried with relief. She immediately made a beeline to him and got down on her knees so she could hug him. Finn looked thoroughly confused by the whole affair. What happened? He asked his father, his blue eyes wide with concern. Where's Anna? Hiccup felt his heart drop but he shook off the uncomfortable sensation. We don't know. Everyone is out looking for her. That's why all the kids are here. Finn nodded solemnly. Oh. Is she coming back? Yes, cried Astrid, placing her hands on her son's shoulders. Yes, she is. We're going to go find her, but to do that, we need you to stay here for a little longer. Can you do that for us? Finn's brows furrowed as he thought very hard about this. He looked his mother in the eye, a serious expression on his face. Yes, Mommy, he said with a nod. At this point, several other parents had found their children safe and sound in the hall. It didn't look like anyone was missing. Hiccup stood up and walked over to Lotus, who was rocking a baby he didn't recognize. The baby's eyes were slowly closing as she began to doze off, safe and comfortable in the older woman's arms. Hiccup felt a pang as he watched her for a few seconds. Adriana used to flutter her eyelids as she fell asleep in his arms as well. Was everything going to remind him of his daughter? How was he asked Lotus, pushing down the emotions. He was very good, actually. He and a few other boys played quietly the whole time. Everyone was keeping a close eye on him but nothing happened. Lotus sighed deeply. I can tell you didn't find Adriana. Hiccup's eyes burned but he blinked them rapidly. No. Dager didn't have her. He was framed. So you don't know who took her? Lotus placed a hand on his shoulder as he continually blinked his eyes, praying that he could hold it together a little while longer. You will get her back. Yeah, he choked, suddenly feeling the intense and inescapable need to be alone. He sprinted as fast as he could to the doors of the great hall, pushing past parents as he ran. Once he was outside, he continued to run into the woods a little way, far enough that no one would find him but close enough that he could still hear if something else went wrong. Toothless followed, surprised at his human speed as he ran through the trees without looking back. The dragon had to sprint to keep up. Once Hiccup stopped, he made a cooing noise and gently placed his head on the man's lap. Thanks, bud. Hiccup said, gently stroking the dragon's head. It's okay, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. He repeated over and over, fighting back the waves of misery coming up in his chest. Everything around him was growing blurry but he shut his eyes and took a few deep, shaky breaths. We are going to find her, bud. The dragon made a sort of whining noise. Hiccup suspected that it was supposed to be sympathetic. For some reason, his dragon's pity made everything in sight become blurry again. Once more, he shut his eyes. I don't cry over things, he chided himself. I cried a little bit when the twins were born but I don't cry over things. I don't. His heart didn't seem to be listening to his brain, he felt it hammering against his chest, painfully constricting as more tears built up in his eyes. No. She needs me and I'm not going to lose it. Toothless made a soft sort of warbling noise, lifting his head and gently nudging his human in the chest. He knew that when humans were very, very sad, water came out of their eyes and they made strange noises. He wasn't going to let his human become very, very sad. Not on his watch. Not today. He nudged his human's chin upwards. What are you saying, bud? Hiccup asked, glad for the small distraction. He lowered his head but Toothless lifted it with his snout once more. For a while, he stared into his dragon's large, cat-like eyes. And then it hit him. It was as if he could read his dragon's mind, even if only for a moment. Keep your chin up. We will find her. For the first time since he had walked into his daughter's room only to find her missing, he smiled. It wasn't a genuine smile. He couldn't possibly manage one of those. But the tiny bit of hope that surged within him lifted his spirits ever so slightly. It let him have just one moment in which he could smile. He rested his head on his dragons, gently stroking the side of his head as the smile finally melted away. "Thank you," he whispered. A few minutes later, he felt better enough to go back into the hall. Astrid was still on her knees and talking to their son. As Hiccup watched, he realized that she always had a hand on him. She would rub his back or grip his hand or squeeze his shoulder. It seemed that her way of coping with losing her daughter was to make sure her son was safe and loved. Finn was smiling as he was talking to her, probably about his toys or the other children with whom he was playing. Astrid's smile didn't reach her eyes, but she was doing her best to be strong for him. Hiccup felt a surge of love and appreciation for his wife. She had to be terrified to death, but she was putting her son first. Astrid truly was the best mother he could imagine for his children. And he was going to make sure his daughter would get the opportunity to experience her love for many more years. He walked up to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I think we should go home. Get some supplies. We'll probably be out searching late." Astrid nodded and kissed Finn on the forehead. Hiccup got on his knees and pulled his son in for a hug. "You need to stay here with Uncle Snotlout, Aunt Heather, Nana, and everyone else. Do what they say. We'll hopefully be back for you tonight," he said, relishing the feeling of his little boy's heartbeat against his chest. When he let Finn go, he took Astrid's hand and they left the hall. It was a short walk to their house, which was a little farther out of town than the other houses. He loved the slight seclusion of it most of the time. Now he hated it for being just out of the way. Maybe if it was in the middle of town, someone would have seen whoever took his little girl. When they got to the front door, they stopped. There was an old piece of parchment nailed to it with a child's drawing they didn't recognize. It looked like a drawing of a girl made by a 4 or 5-year-old. A little bit more advanced than the drawings his children made, but not by much. On the side of the drawing was a darker message, as if it had been written much more recently than the drawing had been created. Not a very good likeness. "I always thought this picture made me look fat." Exchanging looks with Astrid, he took the paper off the door. Adriana hadn't drawn this picture, she drew noses completely differently. Suddenly, his eyes widened as he realized that the message had the same kind of smudges as the Berserker note. Whoever had written that message was left-handed. "Is this supposed to be a clue?" he asked Astrid, who shrugged. He turned over the page and came across some writing on the back. "Your little girl. Your entire world. Is playing with me today. You must find her fast. Before the hourglass runs all of its sand away." They came across that section at the same time and immediately looked down. On the ground next to them was a large hourglass with half of its sand still on top. Would this be how much time they had to find her? They turned back to the note. "I won't hurt her yet. Why, we've only just met. But before you try something heroic to win back your prize, seek out one who is wise. If not just a little bit." "Why does the poem trail off?" Astrid asked, feeling a bit breathless. Is it a puzzle?" "I don't know," Hiccup replied. "Maybe the next part will give us a clue." "What sort of things can a brave Viking do?" "Crush mountains, tame forests, even split things in two. Like a log or a tree or even a boulder. Do you remember that place now that you've gotten older? You should pray to the gods you remember it fast. Want her in your future? Better look to your past." This last bit makes no sense. Who is he talking to? Hiccup muttered. "I don't know," said Astrid, turning to her husband with wide eyes. "But something tells me we better crack this fast." "Yeah." Hiccup's hands began to tremble. "I know why he sent us to Berserker Island. He wanted to leave these things out. Make sure we were gone so he could." "She." Astrid turned the note over. A woman took Adriana. "Look at the picture and the caption. If it's a picture of her, it's a woman." He threw the note to the ground and beat the door with his fist. Not only had Adriana been the target the whole time, but it looked like they were beginning a very dangerous game. Notes. Special thanks to my poet friend, who asked to be credited as Purple Bob. Chapter 8, A Dark Secret. Chapter text. Hiccup and Astrid stared at each other, identical expressions of abject terror on their faces. Dager had been right. The berserkers were framed and the real kidnapper had started her sick little game while they had been distracted. And what was this about their little girl in the note, obviously proving that she had, in fact, been the intended target after all? Was all of it a plan? Quite suddenly, Hiccup felt a surge of rage build up inside his chest, and it was all he could do to not start throwing things. While he was off trying to convict Dager of a heinous crime, this psychopath had a complete run of the village. She could have walked his baby right through Burke and no one would have noticed because the only people who stayed on the island were in the Great Hall watching Finn. He was a fool. He had been played. And there was no other way around it. She's clever, he muttered, his hand gripping the note more tightly than necessary to keep from shaking. Very good plan, distracts everyone while she plays a sick and twisted game. She's insane and she's clever. Who? The young couple turned around to face Fishlegs, Rough Nut, and Tough Nut, who seemed to have walked up while they were distracted. Whoever wrote this note? Whoever took Adriana? Astrid said in monotone, taking the note from Hiccup's hand and giving it to the other couple. Well, that's a terrible poem. Heroic doesn't rhyme with bit. Tough Nut exclaimed, smacking the paper with the back of his hand. I think the ellipsis means we have to fill the rest of the poem in ourselves. Fishlegs said, his brow furrowed. Wait, we have to wait until night. Or did she draw the eclipses on the paper? Tough Nut asked with an eyebrow raised. Not eclipses, ellipsis. It means the, here. Fishlegs pointed to the incomplete sentence. See how there are 3 periods? It trails off. I think we have to fill it in with a rhyme. Rough Nut's mouth opened a bit as she read the paper. What rhymes with heroic? Bloik. Twak. Tough Nut piped up. Actually, I'm pretty sure it's Throic. Rough Nut added, grabbing a rock on the ground and pitching it at her brother. If that's the answer, I already like this game. This is not a game. Hiccup bellowed, making everyone jump. Adriana's life is at stake. Right, sorry. Rough Nut looked properly chastised. She then turned to Tough Nut, an expression of inspiration dawning on her face. Maybe we should ask Stoic. He probably knows more words than we do. That's what I was trying to say. Fishlegs said, sounding quite irritated. The answer is obviously Stoic. Seek out one who is wise if not just a little bit stoic. It's a play on words. It should have been very easy to figure out, but in their panic, neither Hiccup nor Astrid had been able to come up with the answer. Now that it was given to them, they wondered how they had managed to miss it. Brilliant, Fishlegs! Hiccup exclaimed, patting his friend on the back. We've got to find my dad. They tried to pick up the hourglass to show the chief, but it was stuck to the ground. No amount of pulling could loosen it. Abandoning that task, they sprinted off to find the chief, looking in various places he frequented. They finally found him in Gobber's workshop, several weapons already attached to his belt. He looked up as they approached. Did you find her? He asked, looking very hopeful. We found something. Hiccup said, slamming the note down on the table. Stoic took one look at it and visibly paled. Ah. Yes, that makes sense. He muttered as he read the words on the back. I should have seen this coming. Hiccup's patience was very nearly gone. Should have seen what coming? You know who? I know who took Adriana, yes. Stoic looked up at them. Something in his eyes told everyone that knowing the identity of the abductor wasn't as comforting as they might have thought. You think Dager is deranged? We haven't seen anything yet. Who has her? Astrid pleaded, her stomach churning. There was a long pause filled with very oppressive silence. Stoic and Gobber exchanged grim looks, almost as if they were having a silent conversation about whether or not to divulge the information. Stoic gave his friend a small nod before turning back to them. Dad, who has my daughter? Hiccup asked, his green eyes boring into his father's blue ones. My sister. Stoic told them, his voice shaking the tiniest bit. You don't have a sister. Hiccup said, his brows furrowed in confusion. You were an only child. I told you that to keep you safe. Oh really? Hiccup bellowed very suddenly, startling everyone for the second time that day. Yeah, that worked out real well. Why would you lie about something like that? You don't know what happened. Stoic shouted back. She was banished decades ago. Never to come back. I put her on the ship myself. Both times. What do you mean both times? There's a time limit, hiccup. This note mentions an hourglass and I don't know how much sand is left, but I do know that we need to act fast. Stoic interrupted. Let's decipher the clue. Adriana might be hidden in the location it mentions. I think this part is meant for me. Hiccup placed both of his hands in his hair and gripped fistfuls of it, barely registering the discomfort. No, I'm not playing her sick little game. We need to get a bunch of people together and... Stoic looked down at the paper again. Don't try to fool her, she won't hesitate to. What am I supposed to do? Hiccup cried, his voice cracking uncomfortably. I can't just sit here and let her walk all over us. Stoic looked up at him patiently. You have to follow her instructions. Her instructions have given us nothing so far. How far does she expect us to go? If you want Adriana back, then Trista knows you'll go as far as it takes. Stoic sighed. She wants you and Astrid to give up and leave that baby in the cold, alone. She wants to prove that Adriana will be treated no different than she was. Once you start giving up, she starts winning. Don't you let her win. But why? Why would she want that? How could she expect that? Hiccup punched a wall in frustration and several people flinched, surprised at his strength. Knuckles throbbing, he turned back to his father. I'd go to hell and back to make sure she's... In case you haven't noticed, she's not exactly mentally stable. Stoic bellowed, taking them all by surprise. There was a long pause. She'll be dragging me down with her if we don't get Addie back. Hiccup breathed, his heart racing in his throat. Stoic shook his head. No. You will never be like her. I'm not saying that. I'm saying I'm going to go crazy if we just sit here talking. Hiccup shouted the last word, startling the group yet again. Enough. Astrid roared. We don't have all day. She's obviously giving us a fighting chance, and if we waste our time arguing, what will that accomplish? Everyone turned to look at her. She glared at them all and suddenly they realized she was right. Stoic turned back to the note. The last part of the clue is meant for me, he said quietly. What part? The ending bit. That's just gibberish. What place is she talking about? Gobber asked, jabbing the note with his finger. I'm trying to figure that out, Gobber. Stoic took a deep breath, calming himself so that he didn't take out his frustration on his friend. I have to remember a place from my past. And the only clue is about what Vikings can do, split things in two, log, rock, boulder. He muttered to himself as he read the note. What in the world was it talking about? Gobber read over his shoulder for a few seconds before making an odd humming noise. You used to tell this story about when you were a boy. Gobber said quietly. How your father had you bash your head against a rock and it split in two. Of course. Stoic exhaled slowly. That's it. She wants me to go to the place where it happened, but that was decades ago. How in the world could I possibly? Well, you better think about it, because if that hourglass runs out... Shut up, Hiccup, you're not helping. Stoic snapped, oblivious to the looks of shock he received for that statement. Hiccup felt the back of his neck redden at that and thought of a few choice responses, but Astrid's hand on his arm made him bite them down. Stoic shut his eyes, thinking as hard as he could about that day. He remembered his father giving him the order, how he'd been convinced the man had gone mad but had obeyed. How the rock had split in two and he'd been surprised at his own strength, glad that his father had taught him such a valuable lesson. That was what he remembered about that day. Not where it had happened. The only mental picture he could conjure was that it had happened in a clearing in the woods. The trees had been awfully tall, but he wasn't full grown yet either, so that might not have been the most accurate mental picture. What else had been there, distinguishing landmarks, anything to tell him where it had happened? It was a clearing, he said out loud. A clearing in the woods. I remember that much. Well, that narrows it down. Hiccup spat sarcastically. We've only got about 100 of those. I'm doing this for your daughter, so don't you talk to me that way. Stoic hissed, his eyes not leaving the note for a second. Hiccup had the sudden urge to punch his father for that comment. He kept his arms at his sides, fists balled and ready to retaliate if provoked again. Gobber, however, stepped between the two. All right, simmer down. Never thought I'd hear myself saying this, but let the man think. Hiccup, maybe you should step outside, he said gravely, pointing to the door of his workshop. Hiccup exhaled very slowly through his teeth before turning around and stomping out of the workshop, waves of rage practically emanating from him. Gobber, if we don't solve this soon, I do not want to think about what's going to happen. Stoic admitted in a low tone so the others who remained couldn't hear him. Hiccup already looks like he's going to snap. Hiccup. Nah, he doesn't snap, he's as easygoing as a. He's got a limit. You don't want to push it. Trust me. He's close, and if we don't find her soon, you don't want to see him snap. It's not an experience anyone should have. Stoic muttered. Right, to work then. Hiccup sat down on a bench outside of Gobber's workshop and took several deep breaths. Astrid followed him and placed a hand on his shoulder. You aren't doing anyone any favors by panicking, she said as quietly as she could. Your dad is probably worried enough as it is. And how do you know? He looks like he's doing a puzzle with a couple of people at the Great Hall, not deciphering a riddle that could result in his granddaughter's death, he spat back, trembling with rage. And is blowing up at anyone going to bring her back. Astrid countered. You have got to calm down. Calm down. How the hell am I supposed to? You don't think I'm scared? Her voice broke on the last syllable and she had to grip his shoulder so she wouldn't suddenly fall over. I'm scared. Terrified. More than I've ever been in my life. She slowly sat down next to him. But I am pushing down those emotions so my daughter has a fighting chance. You know I've never been as good as you at doing that, he muttered, staring at his hands on his lap. That's because you feel everything strongly. It's one of the reasons I love you. She placed a hand on his back. But it's also a weakness. It's too easy to get under your skin. Your aunt probably knows that. Don't let her get to you. It's what she wants. I know. Hiccup whispered. I know it's all just a game to her. I know that being emotional isn't doing any good. I can't help it, Astrid. She's my baby girl. I'm her hero. What's it going to look like to her when I don't show up and save her right away? That's another reason this is going to be so difficult. Trista knows that Anna's going to be more crushed the longer it takes. She knows it's going to tear you apart. So do something she's not expecting. Astrid stared him dead in the eye when he finally looked up. Don't be predictable. How can I not be predictable? Astrid, we don't know what's coming next or how long it's going to take. Hiccup frowned at her. You're not making sense. I'm making perfect sense, you're just being too blasted stubborn to see it. Hiccup sighed, wiping a bead of sweat off his eyebrow. I'm not trying to be. Then relax. Hiccup scowled deeply at her, and she met his gaze. Don't make me use the hair. Hiccup huffed and lightly rolled his eyes. You wouldn't at a time like this. Astrid reached up and tugged one thick strand of hair behind his ear. He raised an eyebrow at her and she gave him a straight face. Relax, she patted him on the back. Get off the bench and sit on the ground in front of me. What? Why? Just do it. Hiccup reluctantly complied, sitting cross-legged on the ground in front of his wife. The moment he settled down, she placed her hands on his shoulders and began to squeeze. He recoiled slightly before realizing that it actually did make him feel a bit better. He let a soft moan escape his lips before he could stop himself, and the corners of Astrid's mouth raised for a second in triumph. Gods, you're tense. Astrid muttered, beginning to need her muscles to dig into his shoulders. Hiccup felt a sarcastic comeback bubble within him, but he choked it down. He took a nearby stick and began to occupy himself by tearing off strips of its bark. Too many children were walking home from the Great Hall with their parents. He couldn't stand to watch them hug and fuss over their children, all secretly thanking the gods that it wasn't their child who was taken. Astrid caught sight of them as well and felt like her heart was being squeezed in a vice. But to allow these feelings to overwhelm her would be succumbing to weakness, to the trap this Trista person had so expertly crafted. She reached her hand around her husband's neck and pulled his chin up to look in his eyes. He relaxed his shoulders, which is probably why she did it, but he was annoyed. This was no time for googly eyes or kissing. Not here, he whispered with a light shake of his head. Not now. Astrid gently kissed his lips anyway. It's going to be okay. I promise. Just behind them, the door to the workshop opened up and the rest of their friends emerged. Stoic was nearly crumpling the note in his hand but otherwise didn't look as emotional as all of them felt. Hiccup sighed heavily and stood up. Well, what's the plan? The group was glad he looked a lot more calm than before. His skin tone had returned to its normal color, he wasn't shaking and he seemed more relaxed. We're looking for a clearing on the north side of the island. I remembered the poisonberry bushes and there are only 2 clearings that have them. And the other is almost inaccessible without dragons. Stoic explained, calling Tornado to him. So why would we go there? Hiccup asked. The others turned to him in confusion and he shrugged. If it was inaccessible without dragons back then, how would you have gotten there without them? Stoic almost smiled. This is why he knew they had a chance against Trista. Trista was smart, but Hiccup was smarter. Hiccup continued, I mean, let's check it for sure. Just thinking, I guess. Hiccup's right. We check the accessible one first. Stoic said to the rest of the group, all of whom nodded. Hiccup's hunch had proven to be correct. The moment they arrived in that clearing, they found a split rock with a sheet of parchment placed on top. There was another hourglass sitting there, its sand running dangerously low. We've found it. Fishlegs cried, racing forward and snatching the note from the ground. The others crowded around but Fishlegs waved them away, preferring to read the clue aloud. Look to the left and you will be right. A friendship was formed, almost love at first sight. A kinship, a bond that at first was forbidden. Go to the place where you once kept it hidden. Hiccup snatched the note from his friend and, after reading it over again, nearly crumpled it in his hand. He gritted his teeth and tried not to let his emotions take over. She's not here, he said in a low voice. And wherever we have to go is probably just another distraction. Maybe. Astrid said, placing a hand on his shoulder. It was remarkable how tense it had gotten in such a short time. But we're one step closer to finding her. Hiccup turned to look at her, his bright eyes flashing. We'd better be. Chapter 9, The Hunt. Chapter text. For a moment, all was silent. Everyone was giving the note a great deal of thought and no one wanted to speak up for fear that Hiccup would round on them. He was dangerous when he was this desperate. Finally, Stoic strode forward and took the note out of Hiccup's hand. He read it again, his brow furrowed. This one isn't for me, he said, more to himself than to any of them. I never kept any friendships hidden. I did once. Tough Nut piped up, feeling a bit neglected in the conversation. The others turned to him, several with eyebrows raised as they silently encouraged him to continue the story. I was 10 and I had a pet frog, but my mom told me I couldn't have her in the house. So I kept her under Ruff's bed. The next clue must be there. Wait, is that why I kept hearing that weird croaking noise? You told me you were doing that in your sleep. Ruff Nut shouted, punching her brother on the arm. Not exactly love at first sight. Astrid wrinkled her nose. Says you. Her name was Stella and I was heartbroken when Mom found her and made me let her go. Tough Nut said dramatically. The note is not talking about your pet frog. Hiccup said, his head in his hands. Oh yeah. Who's it talking about then? Tough Nut crossed his arms. Hiccup said Astrid, her eyes boring into his. The note is for Hiccup. Look to your left and you will be right. He's left-handed. And we all know he's hidden a friendship. Hiccup raised his eyes and locked them with Astrid. The entire group was confused at what she meant, but he stared back at her with a sudden spark of understanding in his eyes. The cove, he whispered, reaching out a hand to stroke Toothless' head. The next clue is in the cove. Yeah, right. What friendship did you hide? You and Astrid. Everyone knew about that. Tough Nut chortled. It's obviously meant for me. Toothless. I was hiding toothless. Does no one remember? No, it doesn't matter. We need to go. Now. Hiccup rambled, immediately mounting Toothless. Everyone flew off to the cove except Stoic and Gobber. They faced each other for a few seconds. Now might be a good time to fill them in, Stoic. Gobber warned his friend. Now is the worst time to tell them. Trista is already getting into Hiccup's head. I tell them who she is, what she's done, and he'll never be able to think straight. Stoic swung a leg over Tornado. For the record, Gobber said as he got on his dragon, I think you're making a mistake. Yes, you've made that quite clear in the past. Stoic held up a hand to get him to stop talking. We need to focus on getting Adriana back. Anything else is secondary. But Stoic couldn't shake the feeling that Gobber might have been right. If he had been upfront with Hiccup and Astrid from the beginning, would this have happened? It had been one of the best days he'd ever had. Almost better than Hiccup's welcoming ceremony. He lost count of how many people had come to him to congratulate him on his new grandchildren. He felt like the gods were smiling down on him, giving him another chance to set everything right. His son looked like he had on the wedding day, sort of surprised that something this wonderful had actually happened. It was an expression he didn't get to see much. After several hearty congratulations from villagers he didn't know very well, Stoic looked over at Hiccup holding his newborn son and smiled. Something about the way Hiccup held the baby assured him that his son would be a very good father. He gently rocked his body back and forth to make sure the baby slept on despite the confusion and the people pressing in on all sides. Stoic looked over at his daughter-in-law and immediately caught sight of his newborn granddaughter's eyes fluttering closed. She looked completely comfortable in her mother's arms. Stoic couldn't help but think that his grandchildren had the best parents in the world. But who was that woman talking to Astrid? She looked vaguely familiar, like he'd seen her in a dream or in passing on the street. Or had he? She definitely gave off a distinct negative vibe either way. He watched as she snatched the newborn out of Astrid's arms and then returned her seconds later. Something was wrong. And then it hit him. A surge of anger raised in his chest. Trista, he called, stomping over and not caring that he was probably going to make a scene. What the hell are you doing here? Trista looked over at Stoic, a spark of familiar loathing popping up in her grey eyes. In an instant, he knew his hunch had been correct. She smiled and his stomach turned. She'd gotten her filthy hands on Adriana. His eyes flitted over to his granddaughter and he was relieved to notice that she was sleeping deeply, apparently healthy. He quickly prayed that Trista hadn't gotten the opportunity to poison the baby girl. Why, I was only congratulating your daughter-in-law. Trista replied, chuckling softly. I meant no harm. Stoic hoped that he could hold it together long enough to stop himself from killing his sister right then and there. Out. Get out now, he bellowed, pointing to the door and beginning to tremble ever so slightly. Can't I say hello to my own grandness? Trista wouldn't stop laughing and it was beginning to send chills up and down his spine. Stoic lost his cool, bolting forward and grabbing the woman's shoulders, trying not to break them in his massive hands. I said out. The loud noises finally awoke Adriana and she began to wail. Stoic didn't even glance over, he shoved Trista toward the door. Very well, very well. Trista grumbled, her lips pursed as if she was holding back a few choice words. She turned to look at Astrid with an unfamiliar sparkle in her eyes, almost like she was enjoying this interaction immensely. Enjoy her. She really is a lovely little girl. That was enough. Stoic gave her another shove but this time she obediently walked forward, almost not needing the prompting at all. Once they had gotten outside, he loosened his hold slightly and turned her to face him. If you come near my grandchildren again, I will not hesitate to kill you, he whispered, enunciating every syllable so she wouldn't miss a thing. Oh, isn't it about time to let go of these silly grudges, she chortled, a look of abject hatred shining in her eyes. Stoic very nearly choked on thin air. Silly grudges. Was Hiccup a silly grudge? Trista laughed again and it was all Stoic could do to keep himself from striking her. Oh, I've never laid a hand on. You know damn well who I'm talking about. Unless you've forgotten his namesake, he leaned in, his hold on her shoulders tightening. Comprehension seemed to dawn on her. Oh, yes, that was rather unfortunate. Unfortunate. Stoic shouted, not caring that his voice echoed all over the village, easily audible from the great hall. No, no, get out of here before I kill you. I'm going to make sure you leave Berk and never come back. He roughly shoved her toward several guards, who immediately grabbed her and began dragging her to the prison. I'm going, dear brother. I'm leaving, she said in a calm voice, almost as if she was merely discussing the weather. You won't be seeing me here again. Make sure she doesn't escape. I'll come over at dark and banish her again myself, he told his guards before turning around to go back to his family. Stoic stomped back into the great hall, feeling his body trembling. His face felt hot and he wouldn't have been surprised if it had turned red in his rage. He immediately sat down and put his head in his hands, wanting very much to be alone. Hiccup never was very good at picking up on subtle social cues like this. Who was she? He asked, sounding quite concerned. Stoic thought about telling his son why he had acted this way. Did Hiccup deserve to know? Or would he be better off not knowing anything? Stoic shook his head slightly. Stay away from her, he muttered into his hands. But the subject is closed, Hiccup. Stoic exclaimed, patience dwindling by the second. Now someone get me a drink. He didn't take his face out of his hands, but he heard his son walk away and whisper something to Astrid. When he finally looked up, Hiccup, Astrid, and the twins were long gone. Gobber placed a tankard of mead in front of him and sat down across from him. I think you should have told him, he said quite seriously, pushing the drink toward his friend. I can't. Do you have any idea what that information would do to him? He already worries enough as it is, and with 2 new children. With 2 new children, he's going to want to protect them. And how can he when you won't be upfront about your past? Gobber countered. Have you considered that, you know, maybe Trista has caused enough trouble? She's my sister. Stoic slammed his fist against the table. Do you really expect me to execute my own sister? Is banishing her working? For the last 30 years, it worked well enough. Stoic took a deep breath and a large swig of the mead. We send her far enough out, she won't be able to come back. I think you're making a mistake. Gobber leaned in. What if she finds a way back? She's not right in the head. Years of solitude probably addled her brains beyond recognition. And you want to risk that coming after your grandchildren? I will make absolute certain that she won't be able to find her way back. Meanwhile, I'll keep a close eye on them. Stoic took another gulp of mead, draining the tankard entirely. He then leaned back slightly, looking exhausted and, Gobber thought, quite a bit older. I am serious about protecting my grandchildren, Gobber. They are the god's second chance. Do you really think I'd let a madwoman like Trista get close to them under my watch? Are they always going to be under your watch? Gobber asked, leaning forward even more. Always. Stoic replied. And he really did mean what he said. However, it was a few hours before he had made a firm decision regarding Trista and how he would make sure she wouldn't be able to find her way back. As the sun set, he sauntered over to the prison, filled with dread at seeing those cold grey eyes after all those years. Stoic the Vast. Trista said as he walked in, leaning against the bars in an unnervingly casual manner. You know, I never thought I'd see you again. The feeling is mutual. Stoic replied, nodding to a guard. As Trista was removed from the cell, she gave Stoic a smile that made his stomach turn. Shame I have to be banished again. I was just beginning to remember how to get around. A lot has changed around here. Why, a few of the buildings look old. And dragons everywhere, tut tut, I'm surprised the man who killed 1,000 dragons with his bare hands now allows them to be kept as pets. But to each his own, I suppose, she let out another humorless chuckle. I don't think it was you who integrated them. Oh no, but your son, he seems the type, doesn't he? Tie her up and put her on a boat. Be sure to blindfold her so she doesn't know where we're going. Then tie it to Tornado, he commanded the guard. I'll fly her out as far as I can. The guard nodded and in a few minutes, it was finished. Trista did not struggle against her bonds. Stoic gave her some food and a few supplies and then took off on his dragon. It was several hours before he decided that he was far enough out of the way to allow Trista to go free. He directed the boat to an island and untied her and his dragon. "I'm doing this because you're my sister," he said to his hands as he untied her feet. "But it's the last favor I'll ever do for you. If I see you again, I will kill you. Do you understand?" "Oh, I understand completely," Trista said, holding her head high and stepping off the boat and onto the sandy beach of the island. "Good." Stoic nodded and got back on his dragon. "I guess this is goodbye." "Yes. I suppose it is. Goodbye, dear brother." Trista gave him a flippant wave with a wide smile on her face. Tornado took off into the sky. Stoic didn't look back. He didn't think he could trust himself to let her live if he did. But there was no way she would ever make her way back to the island. The thought of this made him smile weakly, and he began to think about going to Hiccup's house for some more time with his new grandchildren. The idea made him feel quite warm inside. Sure, Hiccup had softened him, but it was at moments like these that he felt particularly grateful for the change of heart. A few minutes later, Tornado nearly ran into what looked like an albino deadly nadder flying in the opposite direction. Stoic directed him to swerve out of its way, thinking that it was odd that a nadder would be flying so far away from its pack. All of a sudden, Stoic felt the very strong urge to punch something. Of course. How had he not realized it before? Trista had a dragon. It was how she was able to snatch Adriana away so fast. And how she'd managed to get back to Burke. An albino deadly nadder, how had he never noticed it on the island before? Oh, she was clever. And to think he'd had the opportunity to stop it back then. Hell, he'd had the opportunity to execute her, but he had shown her mercy. Suddenly he had a very strong reason not to tell Hiccup or Astrid about his earlier dealings with Trista. He knew that it was only a matter of time before they needed the whole truth. He was certain they would never forgive him, but if it meant saving his little granddaughter, it was worth the risk. It didn't take long to get to the cove. As the beach came in sight, Hiccup suddenly commanded his dragon to hover over the spot. "It's written in the sand," he called to his companions. "Easier to read from here. She has a twin brother. But there are two others. Who, back in their day, enjoyed their rough play. And a favorite spot that they went to a lot." They landed moments later to take a look at the hourglass. It had quite a bit more sand left than the last and was draining very slowly. Apparently they had solved the last riddle faster than expected. Hiccup wasn't sure whether this was good or bad. Would Trista become frustrated with them for their quick minds, or would she relish the opportunity to make the game even harder? He had no frame of reference. "So she's talking about more twins?" Ruffnut asked, her mind clearly at work. "Wow, do you know more twins?" "Me? No. Other than us, I can't think of any." Toughnut exclaimed, an expression of pure confusion on his face. "Oh Thor, you're impossible." Astrid snapped. "She's talking about you. Did you have any favorite spots when you were kids?" "Only about 1,000,000 of them. This could take forever to figure out." Ruffnut sat down on a nearby rock. "Yeah. The one clue about us, and it turns out to be an impossible riddle." Toughnut sat down next to his sister, who shoved him off seconds later. "What about your dark, soggy alone place?" Fishlegs suggested, shuddering slightly at the name. "Oh. Wait, we went there a lot. I go there a lot." Ruffnut gave Toughnut a very suspicious glance. "You go there a lot? It's my spot. Leave the domestics out of it and let's go." Hiccup shouted, swinging a leg over Toothless once more. As the others flew off, Fishlegs began to have some issues with Meatlug's saddle. Astrid waved them off so she could stay behind and help. "How are you doing?" he asked her once everyone else was out of earshot. "Doesn't really matter. Hiccup's close to complete meltdown, and if I don't keep it together, everything's going to fall apart," she said, untangling a few stitches with an unnervingly calm expression. "Astrid, she's your daughter too. The last time Hiccup lost control, I was giving birth on an island in the middle of the ocean 12 hours later," she snapped. "Right now, it's about making sure he doesn't go nuts." "But who's going to make sure you won't?" Fishlegs gently countered, putting a hand on Astrid's shoulder. I can take care of myself, she said, sighing deeply. I think I fixed the problem. Now come on, we don't have a lot of time. They can wait for a second. Fishlegs said in a surprisingly firm voice. If you aren't going to talk about it, let me do something for you. But we're running out of. Fishlegs didn't listen to Astrid's objections as he raced forward and threw his arms around her, squeezing her tight. Astrid was shocked at this sudden affection, but then, as the surprise wore off, she had to work very hard not to shed any tears. She slowly lifted her hands and placed them on Fishlegs' back. For a few seconds, she felt like she could relax a little bit, that she could share the part of the burden that only she carried with her friend. The extra pat on the back she received told her that he had gotten the message and that he was going to be the one to make sure she didn't lose control. In those few seconds, Astrid thanked the gods for sending her such a good friend. He finally let go and gave her a small smile in an attempt to continue to encourage her. It was incredible how such a small gesture of kindness could lift her spirits so much. Choking back tears, she patted him on the shoulder. Thank you. I did need that. I thought so. And thanks for the help with the saddle. He got on his dragon and waited for her to mount hers before flying off after the rest of the group. The twins' favorite spot was pretty far outside the village. They immediately flew into the cave's entrance and spotted the rest of the group crowded around the next clue. Next to the parchment was an hourglass which was only drained halfway. They didn't appear to have been there for a very long time. Stoic handed Astrid a torch so she and Fishlegs could read the note themselves. There's a place where fish live. But there's only one fin. And a once happy family resided within. They are getting more cryptic. Hiccup muttered. That means you're getting close. Stoic gently took the note from Astrid's hand and read it over again. There was a long silence as everyone mulled over the information in the note. Suddenly, Fishlegs' head shot up, his eyes wide. I know where it's leading, he said in a shaky voice. And you're definitely not going to like it. Chapter 10, Snap. Chapter text. There was a pause as everyone turned to look at Fishlegs. He took a step back, fully expecting an enraged Hiccup to attack something when he knew where the next clue was hiding. A place where fish live is a metaphor. Your last name is Haddock, which is a kind of fish. Fishlegs began. And she isn't talking about a fin as part of a fish, she's talking about the person. Fin. Astrid finished. Exactly. The next clue is at your house. Fishlegs exclaimed, looking triumphant. But that's impossible. That's where the first clue was, that's. Hiccup suddenly crumpled the note and threw it at the wall. She's following us. No. Hiccup, we didn't go into the house. Astrid said, her face ashen. She knew we'd see the note on the door, it would distract us. So this whole time. I don't know. Astrid tried to put a hand on her husband's shoulder but he shrugged it off. And what the hell does it mean, a once happy family? Is she? We need to go. Stoic said in a low voice. Just keep going and don't think about that. Let's go then. All emotion suddenly drained from Hiccup's face, leaving a blank expression. Stoic leaned in to talk to Gobber in a low voice. He's going to snap soon. You're probably right. Gobber replied, raising his eyes slightly as Hiccup shot out of the cave at top speed. Stoic got on his dragon and Gobber mounted his. This has got to end. We have got to make sure Adriana's back safe. That's why we're here. Gobber replied before taking off with the others into the sunset. Hiccup very nearly kicked down his own front door the moment they landed, bolting into the main room. The moment he saw what lay directly in front of him, his heart stopped. On the table was an hourglass with no sand in the top half. Forcing himself to stay calm, he walked forward and picked it up. Unlike the first, it was portable. And, to his slight relief, he saw a note tucked under it. She was here, he muttered, slamming the hourglass back on the table as he unfolded the note. We wasted our time running around Burke when this whole time, she was just leading us here. What does the note say? Astrid asked, stepping forward and trying to get close enough to her husband to reassure him in some way. Hiccup tossed the note on the ground. I'm not. I can't. Someone else open it. No one made a move to pick up the note. Truthfully, no one wanted to get close to Hiccup for fear that he would take out his anger on them. Fishlegs finally decided to risk the repercussions and stepped forward to pick up the clue. He opened it and read out loud in a clear voice. "Congratulations, you've earned a night's rest. Yes, the sand has run out, but this was only a test. Don't try to find us when the moon's in the sky. Or, before the sun rises, your daughter will die. But when it does rise, you'll continue your work. The next clue will be somewhere public on Burke. So rest with this comfort, your Addie is well. Will that continue? Tomorrow will tell. So she expects us to rest. While Adriana is somewhere out there with a psychopath probably torturing her." Hiccup slammed his fist against the table, his breathing ragged. No, if I have to be out all night, I'm going to. You're going to stay here. Trista won't hesitate to kill her if you disobey." Stoic interrupted. "She's only 3 years old, Dad, she wouldn't kill her. She's killed younger." Stoic strode over to a chair and pulled it in front of the couch, motioning for them to sit down. "No, we don't have. We have all night. Sit down. I need to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago." Stoic motioned for them to sit down again. Hiccup and Astrid slowly walked over to the couch and sat down. Astrid gently reached down and gripped Hiccup's hand, trying to do something, anything, to make him feel better. "I didn't tell you this because I was selfish. I wanted to pretend it never happened. Pretend Trista didn't exist so that you wouldn't be burdened with that knowledge. But now, I know you will never forgive me. I ask only that you listen and allow me to keep helping you find Adriana." Stoic explained. Gobber stepped forward and sat down next to him. "When I was born, I was the golden child. My father gave me everything I wanted, held back nothing. My mother was proud that she produced a strong future chief. But Trista, she was overlooked. The mistake. She was born 5 years before me. I once overheard my father talking to someone about how hard it had been to have another child. How he had feared that he would have to find someone else, a different family, to take over when he passed on. How the day Trista was born was the worst day of his life while the day I was born." Stoic took a deep breath, trying not to sound emotional as he continued to speak. "I don't blame her. To be given no love, no attention your entire life, to have parents who blatantly favor one child over her, anyone would snap. Is that what she expects?" Hiccup asked, staring down at his and Astrid's clasped hands. "For us to just let Adriana die so she won't get in the way or something?" "That's exactly what she expects," Stoic replied. "So we prove that's not true. We come after her. Once she sees how much is changed, how much we love Anna. If we were dealing with someone sane, I would agree with you. But we're not. She snapped a long time ago and her banishment hasn't done her any favors. And with her hatred for me, I wonder whether she'll let Adriana go so willingly." Stoic took a deep breath. "She proved at a young age that she is capable of killing her own flesh and blood." Hiccup would have paled even more if he wasn't already white as fresh fallen snow. He felt his heart stop beating and briefly wondered if he would keel over and die with all the stress that had been pressing in on him all day. "She's killed before?" Astrid asked, her hold on Hiccup's hand growing tighter. "Who?" "Hiccup." The group's collective expression became very confused. "He was my brother. You were small as a baby but he was tiny. They named him Hiccup. And your mother and I named you after him. But I know all about the first 2 Hiccup horrendous haddocks, wouldn't that make me the 4th?" Hiccup asked, his heart now pounding in his throat. "He died before the welcoming ceremony. So he never had an official name. But that was the one he would have had." Stoic's voice finally broke and he stared down at his lap. "Trista was banished because she killed him the night after he was born. I don't know what happened but I saw the crib afterward. Blood everywhere, coating the bottom and on the sides. I know there wasn't much left of him to bury." Gobber continued, allowing Stoic to take a break. "Trista was banished but the damage was done. Your grandmother was never the same after that. She got sick and died about a month later. And from then on, It was forbidden to speak about Trista or about Hiccup. We were to go on like nothing had ever happened. There was a long, painful silence. It was as if all the sound had been sucked out of the room, like everyone had gone deaf. Hiccup slowly lowered his face into his free hand, breathing deeply and quietly. Finally, Stoic couldn't handle the silence anymore. "I know I should have told you." "Shut up." Hiccup muttered into his fingers. "Hiccup. I said shut up." Hiccup bellowed, hopping to his feet and stomping across the floor. "You don't get to talk to me, not one more word, not after everything you kept from me for all these years." "I know. It was wrong." Stoic slowly stood up and tried to walk over to his son. "I am so. Don't you say you're sorry. You are way past that." Hiccup pushed his father away, trembling with rage. "Don't you think I would have wanted to know this psychopath was on the loose so I could protect my children from her? I wanted to protect you, I banished her twice and did everything I could to make sure she couldn't." "Well, you didn't try hard enough." Hiccup picked up the hourglass, holding it up and aiming it at his father. He froze, his eyes widening in horror. "Is she still alive?" There was no response. Stoic averted his gaze. He couldn't lie to Hiccup, but he couldn't bring himself to say the words. Hiccup decided to continue. "Are we going to go through all of this only to find out she's been dead this whole time?" "I don't know." Stoic whispered in a barely audible voice, shutting his eyes tight and expecting the blow he knew he deserved. Hiccup paused, completely speechless but making odd choking noises with his throat. Astrid's heart pounded and she prayed that he wouldn't actually strike his father. A few seconds later, he turned around and hurled the hourglass at the wall. It shattered, sending sand flying everywhere. He turned back to his father, a fire in his eyes that so few had seen before, that Astrid had prayed she would never see again. "Because of your mercy, Adriana has to spend a night with this psychopath," he exclaimed, not quite shouting but not speaking at normal volume either. "Alone, and who knows what she's thinking or feeling. Well, I know one thing. She's wondering where we are. Why we haven't come. And I'm stuck here because of this stupid note, trying to keep her safe but I can't. She could be killed any second and there's nothing I can." Hiccup slapped a hand to his face, his eyebrows pulling low over his eyes to help pull in the waves of emotion. He constricted his throat to choke it down, but a strangled noise emitted from it with each intake of breath. The room blurred and when he closed his eyes, he felt the tears streaming down his face. He turned away from the group, resting his other hand on the wall for support. He felt his knees give out and he slipped to the floor, his body heaving with sobs he couldn't hold back. Arms wrapped around his neck and he felt Astrid pull him into her chest. Hiccup hunched over, his hands pulling his hair. Astrid held him on her lap, not trying to console him. He needed to cry. Stoic had heard his son cry many times. He was a particularly restless baby and had gotten numerous painful injuries as a little boy. But never in his life had he heard his son, or anyone for that matter, cry so painfully, so full of anguish. He had to turn his head away as he gently waved the others out, but most of them had already made the move. No one wanted to be there for that. But as they closed the door behind them and walked away, the sounds of a broken father's sobs would forever be etched into their minds as the most horrible sound a person could make. All the fear and doubt poured into Hiccup's soul so much his chest hurt, making it hard to breathe. He knew that he was a failure as a father, his baby girl was in the wilderness freezing to death at the hand of a murderer and psychopath. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. He was a complete and utter failure. A burst of rage surged within him and he screamed at the top of his lungs, making Astrid grip him tighter. "Shush!" Astrid finally whispered when the scream died and he was left panting. The door clicked behind them and she knew Stoic and the others were finally gone. No matter what Trista said in her note, she had a feeling that none of them would be sleeping well tonight. Not by a long shot. Hiccup cried onto her lap for what felt like an eternity. Whenever it seemed he was calm, the torturous cries would start up again. But she never stopped holding him, running her fingers gently through his hair, wishing she could do anything to bring her baby and husband back. Trista was ruining their lives. She kidnapped their baby girl, Finn was forced to stay in the home of another family to be safe, and Hiccup was losing all mental capacity. and she knew deep down that she wasn't far behind him. Hiccup was finally left with hiccups, his back shaking with each inhale. Astrid brushed her hand on his neck and looked down at him. The expression on his face nearly made her cry. She had never seen her husband, her best friend, look so broken. The only thing that kept her from doing so was the burning anger in her soul for the woman who caused it all. But she forced it away and tried to look at him. She didn't know what to say, but she felt she had to say something. "We should get to bed." She hated those particular words that elected themselves to pop out of her mouth. Hiccup closed his eyes firmly, picturing Adriana's face. 2 tears streaked down his cheeks, but he made no sound. Astrid lightly wiped them away. "It's going to be okay."